Millionaire freezes at Harvard graduation when he sees his ex-maid with a girl that looks just like him. His champagne glass froze mid-air, his entire body locked in place like someone had pressed pause on his life, because standing 30 feet away at Harvard's graduation ceremony was Maria Alvarez, the maid who'd vanished from his family's estate 20 years ago without a trace. But it wasn't Maria that made his blood run cold. It was the girl next to her in cap and gown, laughing with Maria's arm around her shoulder, wearing his face, his jaw, his nose, that exact smirk he saw in the mirror every morning. And David Sullivan's brain was doing math that didn't add up, but also added up perfectly. And he was either looking at his daughter or losing his mind. And he honestly couldn't tell which possibility terrified him more. Before we continue this wonderful story, click subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, the Caribbeans, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're listening from. Now let's get to where the story began. David Sullivan hated graduations the way cats hate water, instinctively, viscerally, and with the kind of disdain that made his Italian leather shoes feel itchy against the manicured grass of Harvard Yard. Too many people, too much sentiment, too many parents ugly crying into monogrammed handkerchiefs, while their offspring marched around in what looked like medieval choir robes designed by someone who'd never heard of breathable fabric. But here he was anyway, because apparently being a godfather came with obligations nobody mentioned when you agreed to hold a screaming infant over a baptismal font 23 years ago. Greg Thornton, his college roommate, best man at his first wedding, and the only person who still had embarrassing photos from their semester in Amsterdam, had guilted him into attending his son's graduation. Or was it his daughter? David honestly couldn't remember. He'd sent a card with a check so large it could have covered a down payment on a decent brownstone in Brooklyn. Surely that counted for something. "David, there you are!" A woman's voice cut through the sea of celebratory noise like a yacht horn through fog. It was Carolyn Thornton, Greg's wife, all silk scarves and pearl earrings the size of quail eggs, her smile stretched so tight it could have been Botoxed into permanence. "We've been looking everywhere for you." David manufactured his boardroom smile, the one that had closed deals with senators and venture capitalists who looked like they'd bought their souls on installment plans. "Carolyn, wonderful to see you. Which one is yours again?" She laughed like he'd made a joke. "Oh, you're terrible. It's Mitchell, of course. He's over there somewhere in that sea of blue." She gestured vaguely at approximately 300 graduates who all looked identical in their caps and gowns, like a very educated penguin colony. Right. Mitchell. Of course. David had no idea who Mitchell was. Could have been the kid who always smelled like energy drinks, or the one who'd tried to pitch him a cryptocurrency based on organic kale. They all blurred together after a while. "The ceremony was beautiful, wasn't it?" Carolyn continued, apparently not noticing or caring that David's attention had already drifted. "And that valedictorian speech absolutely stunning. Did you hear it?" David had been on his phone during the speech, responding to emails from Tokyo. "Must have missed it. Conference call." "Oh, you poor thing, always working." "Well, it was given by this remarkable young woman, Sophia Alvarez. Full scholarship student, double major in economics and social policy, raised by a single mother who worked as a domestic worker. Can you imagine? From poverty to Harvard valedictorian." Carolyn's voice had that particular pitch wealthy white women used when discussing bootstrap stories, like she was personally responsible for dismantling systemic inequality by being moved by it. David made a non-committal sound and took a sip of his champagne. It was good champagne. The kind that cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. The kind that tasted like liquid gold and poor financial decisions. He'd brought it himself because he knew Harvard's budget would run towards sparkling wine that tasted like carbonated regret. "Where did you say Greg was?" David asked. scanning the crowd with the desperation of a man looking for any excuse to end a conversation. "Oh, he's trying to get a photo with the dean. You know Greg." Carolyn rolled her eyes affectionately. "Always networking." Some things never changed. Greg had been that way in college, too. The guy who knew everyone's name, remembered their hometown, asked about their sick grandmother. David had always found it exhausting. He preferred transactions to relationships, cleaner, more predictable, fewer birthday cards to remember. "Well, I should probably find him," David said, already moving away. "Congratulate the kid. Mitchell, your son." "You're such a dear," Carolyn called after him. But David was already gone, swimming through the crowd like a shark in a gold suit. Custom-tailored naturally, because off the rack was for people who flew commercial. He wove through clusters of families taking photos, past professors in academic regalia that made them look like extras from a Harry Potter movie, around tables laden with finger foods that were trying very hard to be fancy but mostly succeeding at being small. Someone bumped into him, apologized profusely. David waved them off without looking. That's when he saw her. At first it was just a flash, a profile, a familiar curve of a shoulder, a specific way someone held their head that triggered something deep in his cerebral cortex, in the part of his brain where old memories lived like archived files in a dusty server room. He stopped walking. The crowd continued to swirl around him like a river flowing around a boulder, but David stood completely still. Champagne glass tilted at a precarious angle, eyes locked on a woman standing about 30 feet away. She was older than he remembered. Of course she was, time being the relentless bastard it was. But there was no mistaking her. The same warm brown skin with that beautiful deep undertone, like mahogany kissed by sunlight. The same elegant posture despite being several inches shorter than everyone around her. The same way she stood with her hands clasped in front of her, patient and observant, like she was witnessing the world instead of participating in it. Maria Alvarez. The name hit him like a freight train made of nostalgia and guilt. Maria, who'd worked in his family's Beacon Hill estate for 5 years. Maria, who'd polished silver with more care than his mother ever showed her jewelry. Maria, who'd hummed old R&B songs while folding laundry, who'd made the best arroz con pollo he'd ever tasted, who'd been the only person in that entire cold marble mausoleum of a house who'd ever smiled at him without wanting something in return. Maria, who'd disappeared 20 years ago like smoke, without a word, without a forwarding address, without any explanation that made sense. His father had been characteristically cryptic about it. She's gone, found better opportunities. His mother had been even less helpful. We've hired someone new. Don't be difficult, David. And that had been that. The kind of dismissal that rich people specialized in, erasing working-class people from their lives with the same casual efficiency they used to delete spam emails. David had been 19 then, home for Christmas break during his sophomore year at Harvard. He'd asked about Maria a few times, confused by her sudden absence. But his parents had shut down the conversation so quickly and so coldly that he'd eventually stopped asking. Then he'd gone back to school, gotten absorbed in his classes and his startup ideas and his evolving plans to build an empire, and Maria had become just another ghost in the sprawling mansion of his memory. But here she was, real, solid, wearing a simple navy dress and holding a bouquet of flowers wrapped in that cheap cellophane they sold at grocery stores, looking at someone with such pure, uncomplicated love that David felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed shut for a very long time. He followed her gaze, and that's when the world tilted sideways. Standing next to Maria, being hugged by her with the kind of fierce pride that rewrites gravity, was a young woman in cap and gown. She was laughing, radiant, her face lit up with the kind of joy that only comes from achieving something impossible. She had Maria's curls, wild and beautiful, framing her face like a crown. She had Maria's smile, warm and generous, but she had David's face, his jaw, His nose, slightly crooked from where he'd broken it playing lacrosse in prep school. His eyes, that specific shade of blue-gray that his grandmother used to call storm-colored. His mouth, with that asymmetrical quirk that made him look perpetually amused, like he knew a punchline nobody else had heard yet. It was like looking in a mirror that had been filtered through time and genetics and impossibility. The champagne glass slipped from his hand. It didn't shatter. This was Harvard. They'd sprung for real grass, not the cheap stuff that concealed concrete. But it hit the ground with a dull thud, expensive champagne soaking into the earth like a $300 mistake. David didn't notice. He was doing math. The kind of math that doesn't require a calculator because it's etched in your bones, in your memory, in the specific way trauma marks time. Maria had left just after Christmas, 20 years ago. Almost 21, actually. The girl, the young woman, looked about 20. Maybe 21. Oh, God. Oh, God. His heart was a jazz drummer having a seizure. His mouth tasted like copper and panic. His perfectly tailored suit suddenly felt like it was made of fiberglass and regret. Sir, you dropped this. Some helpful student had retrieved his champagne glass, was holding it out to him with a concerned expression. David took it automatically, didn't even look at them. Thanks. The student hovered for a moment, probably waiting for a tip or a thank you or literally any acknowledgement that David was a functioning human being. But David had already forgotten they existed. He was staring at Maria and the girl, his daughter, oh Jesus Christ, his daughter, watching them take photos with friends, watching the girl throw her head back and laugh at something someone said, watching Maria's hand rest on the girl's shoulder with such casual ownership that it screamed 2 decades of motherhood. How had he not known? Why hadn't Maria told him? Why had his parents... Oh no. The realization dropped on him like a piano from a cartoon window. His father, Charles Sullivan, real estate magnate, Boston Brahmin, the kind of man who wore his Harvard ring like it was a papal seal, the kind of man who treated household staff like furniture, useful, replaceable, unworthy of consideration, beyond their function, the kind of man who would absolutely, definitely, without question, make a problem disappear if it threatened the family's reputation. David's stomach lurched. He thought he might throw up into a decorative bush. "David, there you are!" Greg's voice boomed from somewhere behind him. "Come on. I want you to meet Mitchell and... Hey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." David couldn't respond. Couldn't move. Couldn't do anything except stand there like a glitching robot, watching as Maria said something to the girl, watching as the girl nodded, watching as they started to walk. Toward him. No, not toward him, just in his general direction. They had no idea he was there. Why would they? He was just another wealthy white guy in an expensive suit at a Harvard graduation. There were probably 50 of him here. But they were getting closer. 20 feet. 15 feet. 10. David's brain was screaming at him to move, to walk away, to not create a scene in the middle of Harvard Yard surrounded by hundreds of witnesses and at least 3 people actively filming for their Instagram stories. But his feet had apparently unionized and gone on strike. 8 feet. 5. Maria saw him first. Her eyes, those warm, observant eyes that had always seen too much, widened just slightly. Her step faltered for just a fraction of a second, so brief that anyone else would have missed it. But David didn't miss it, and in that moment, he knew she knew that he knew. The girl, his daughter maybe, possibly, probably, noticed Maria's hesitation and looked up, following her gaze. Their eyes met. Blue-gray storm eyes meeting blue-gray storm eyes across a crowd of Harvard graduates and their families and 20 years of silence and secrets. The girl's eyebrows went up, just slightly, that same expression David made when he was intrigued by a business proposal or a particularly clever argument. She leaned toward Maria and said something. David couldn't hear it over the noise of the crowd, but he could read lips well enough to catch. Is that him? Maria's response was subtle, the slightest nod. The kind of gesture that could mean anything or nothing depending on who was watching. But David was watching. And he knew. The girl, God, he needed to know her name, turned back to look at him. Really look at him. The kind of assessment that David usually did to other people, the kind of analysis that stripped away pretense and saw straight through to the core. She smiled. It was his smile, the exact same asymmetrical quirk, like she knew something funny that nobody else would understand. And then she started walking toward him. Maria reached out like she was going to stop her, but the girl was already moving, cutting through the crowd with the kind of confidence that didn't ask permission, just took up space and assumed the world would accommodate. David's mouth was dry. His hands were shaking. He was a man who'd pitched to billionaires and testified before Congress and given TED Talks to thousands of people without breaking a sweat, and right now he couldn't remember how to form words. She stopped about 3 feet away from him. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. She was beautiful, of course she was, with Maria's features softening his sharper angles. But it was the intelligence in her eyes that caught him, the same calculating gleam he saw in his own mirror every morning. "Hi," she said. Her voice was clear, confident, touched with just the slightest Boston accent that came from growing up somewhere other than Beacon Hill. "You must be David Sullivan." He blinked. "You know who I am?" "Of course." That smile again, amused and sharp. "I've read your book, watched your TED Talks. Almost did my senior thesis on your failed startup. What was it called? Lutecoin? But my advisor said it was too depressing." Behind her, Maria made a sound that might have been a laugh she was trying to suppress. David's brain finally rebooted enough to form coherent speech. It wasn't my finest moment." "No kidding. You lost what, 18 million in 6 months? That's almost impressive." She said it without malice, just stating facts the way someone might comment on the weather. 22 million, actually, David heard himself say. "But who's counting?" "Your investors, probably." Despite everything, the shock, the confusion, the building existential crisis, David almost laughed. Maria stepped forward then, her hand finding the girl's shoulder in that same protective gesture David had noticed before. Up close, he could see that Maria had aged gracefully, laugh lines around her eyes, a few silver strands woven through her dark hair. She was still beautiful. She'd always been beautiful. "David," Maria said quietly. Just his name. Nothing else. "Maria." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "It's been a long time." "Yes, it has." They stood there, 3 people locked in a moment that was expanding and contracting like a lung, full of everything that hadn't been said for 20 years. David looked at the girl again, then back at Maria, then at the girl. "Is she—" he started, then stopped. "How did you even ask this question? What were the words? Is she—" "Sophia," the girl, Sophia, interrupted. "My name is Sophia Alvarez, and before you ask whatever incredibly awkward question you're trying to ask, maybe we should go somewhere less public?" She gestured around at the crowd, at the people taking photos, at Greg who was now waving frantically from across the lawn, probably wondering why David was having an intense conversation with strangers at his son's graduation. David nodded mutely. Sophia glanced at Maria. "Mama, is this okay?" Mama. The word hit David like a bullet he didn't see coming. Maria hesitated, her eyes searching Sophia's face for something. Permission, maybe, or strength, or forgiveness for a secret kept too long. Finally, she nodded. "There's a garden," Sophia said, already walking. "Behind Memorial Church. Quieter." David followed, his body moving on autopilot while his brain tried to process what was happening. Behind him, he heard Carolyn calling his name. Heard Greg's confused, "What the hell?" But none of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the young woman walking ahead of him, wearing his face like a mask, and the woman beside her who disappeared from his life, carrying what might be the biggest secret he'd never known. The garden was small, tucked away from the main celebration, with stone benches and climbing roses that hadn't quite bloomed yet. Sophia sat on one bench, Maria on another. David remained standing because sitting felt too casual, too domestic, too much like this was a normal conversation. "So," Sophia said, crossing her legs and looking up at him with those storm-gray eyes. "I'm guessing you have questions." David laughed. It came out slightly hysterical. "That's an understatement." "Let's start with the obvious one then." Sophia leaned back, completely composed, like she was in a job interview instead of a potentially life-altering confrontation. "You want to know if you're my father?" The word hung in the air between them like a judge's gavel waiting to fall. David looked at Maria. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, part sadness, part defiance, part something else entirely. "Are you?" he asked quietly. Maria took a breath, released it slowly. "No," she said. The world stopped spinning. David's knees almost buckled. The relief was so intense it felt like pain, like every nerve in his body had been pulled taut and suddenly released all at once. He grabbed the back of the bench to steady himself. She's not... He couldn't finish sentences. Words had apparently become optional. "She's not your daughter," Maria confirmed, her voice steady and calm. The same way she used to speak when his mother was having one of her episodes and the whole house felt like it was made of cracked glass. "She's my niece, my sister Veronica's daughter." Sophia was watching him with that same analytical expression, measuring his reaction like a scientist observing an experiment. "You look like you're about to pass out. Should I get you some water? Or more champagne? You seem like a champagne guy." "Your sister," David repeated, ignoring Sophia entirely and focusing on Maria. His brain was trying to catch up, to rewrite the narrative he'd constructed in approximately 90 seconds of pure panic. "You had a sister." "Have," Maria corrected gently. "Had. She passed away when Sophia was 2. "I'm sorry." The words came automatically. The kind of condolence you learn in expensive prep schools alongside which fork to use for salad and how to pretend you care about rowing. Maria nodded, accepting his sympathy with grace. "It was a long time ago. Overdose. Veronica got caught up with some bad people, made some bad choices. By the time I found her, got her into rehab, it was already too late. The damage was done." Sophia's expression flickered, just for a moment, revealing something beneath that confident exterior. Pain, old and worn smooth by time, like a stone at the bottom of a river. "So you took her in," David said, the pieces starting to fit together, though the picture they were making still didn't make complete sense. "You raised her." "I did." Maria's chin lifted slightly, defensive and proud. "Veronica made me promise. Made me swear on our mother's grave that I'd take care of Sophia, that I'd give her a better life than we had. So I did. But the resemblance..." David gestured vaguely at Sophia, at her face that was so unnervingly similar to his own. "How is that even possible?" Sophia laughed, sharp and bright. "Genetics are hilarious, aren't they? My biological father was a guy named Patrick O'Connor. Irish as they come. Never met him. He took off before I was born. But apparently he had the same bone structure, same coloring, same general, I'm smarter than you and we both know it face." She paused. "My therapist calls it cosmic irony. I call it God has a weird sense of humor." David stared at her. This girl, this young woman who wasn't his daughter but looked like she should be, was casually discussing the coincidence of genetics like it was a mildly interesting anecdote instead of the thing that had just caused him to have a near-death experience in the middle of Harvard Yard. "You're taking this very well," he said. "Am I?" Sophia tilted her head. "I've known about you my whole life. Known that I looked like you. Known that people would assume things. Mama showed me pictures when I was old enough to understand. Said it was better to be prepared than surprised." She glanced at Maria. She was right. David turned back to Maria, and that's when he saw it. The weight she was carrying, heavy and old, settled into her shoulders like stones. "You knew people would think she was mine." "I knew your family would think she was yours," Maria corrected. "And that's why I left." The air in the garden suddenly felt thinner. "What do you mean?" David asked, though some part of him already knew, already understood, was already bracing for impact. Maria stood up slowly, smoothing her navy dress with hands that were completely steady despite everything. She'd always had that ability, to remain calm when the world was burning down around her. David remembered that from the house, from watching her navigate his mother's mood swings and his father's cold dismissals with the same unflappable grace. "Your father," Maria began, and just those two words contained volumes. "He had certain expectations of the people who worked in your home." David's stomach dropped to somewhere around his knees. "He never touched me," Maria said quickly, reading his expression. "Not like that. But he wanted to. Made it very clear that he wanted to. Started finding reasons to be alone with me. Started making comments. Started—" She trailed off, her jaw tightening. "Your mother knew. Of course she knew. She just looked the other way because that's what women like her do. Protect the man. Blame the help." Sophia's hand found Maria's, a gesture of support, of solidarity, of two women who'd survived things together. "Then I got pregnant," Maria continued. "Not by your father, by a guy I'd been seeing, another worker at a different house on the hill, but he disappeared when I told him. Just vanished, and I was alone and pregnant, and your father—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He saw an opportunity." David felt sick. Properly, physically sick. "What did he do?" "He told me that if I stayed, people would assume the baby was his, that it would cause a scandal, that it would destroy your family's reputation, that your mother would make my life hell and the baby's life hell, and that I'd never work again." Maria's voice was still calm, still steady, but there was steel underneath it now. "He offered me money, a lot of money, enough to disappear, to start over somewhere else, to keep quiet." "Jesus Christ," David whispered. "I didn't take it," Maria said firmly. "I told him to go to hell in 3 languages, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not with him making threats. Not with your mother's lawyers probably already drawing up papers to destroy me if I didn't leave on my own." She looked directly at David. "So I left, that night. Packed everything I could carry, left the rest, and moved in with Veronica in Dorchester." David remembered that night. Vaguely. He'd been home for Christmas break, probably drunk at some party his prep school friends were throwing. Probably not thinking about anything except which startup idea he'd pitch to his father for funding. He'd come home to an empty house, his parents at some charity gala, the staff gone for the evening, and hadn't thought anything of it. The next morning, Maria was gone, and he'd barely questioned it. The guilt hit him like a wave, sudden and overwhelming. He'd been so absorbed in his own life, his own ambitions, his own carefully constructed future, that he hadn't noticed a woman who'd been nothing but kind to him was being harassed out of her job. "I'm so sorry," he said, and meant it. "I had no idea. If I'd known—" "What would you have done?" Maria asked, not unkindly, just genuinely curious. "You were 19. You were your father's son. You were learning to be exactly like him. The words stung because they were true. David had worshipped his father back then, wanted to be him, wanted the same power, the same influence, the same ability to move through the world like rules were suggestions that didn't apply to you. It wasn't until years later, after his first divorce, after his first business failure, after enough therapy to fund a therapist's vacation home, that he'd started to see what his father really was. And by then, Charles Sullivan was dead, cremated, his ashes scattered in the Charles River like he'd requested, taking all his secrets with him. "So you raised Sophia alone," David said, looking at the young woman who was still watching him with those unsettling eyes. "In Dorchester, on a housekeeper's salary." "2 housekeeping jobs, actually," Sophia interjected. "Sometimes 3. Mama worked herself half to death to put me through private school on scholarship, make sure I had everything I needed." She smiled at Maria. "She's the reason I'm here. Not genetics. Not luck. Her." The pride in Sophia's voice was so pure, so genuine, that David felt something crack in his chest. This girl, woman, had grown up without any of the advantages he'd had, without the trust fund or the connections or the safety net of generational wealth, and she'd still made it to Harvard. Still graduated as valedictorian. While his own son, God, when was the last time he'd even talked to his son, was currently enrolled at his 3rd rehab facility in 2 years. "What did you major in?" David asked Sophia, because he didn't know what else to say. "Economics and social policy, double major." She said it casually, like it wasn't a combination that required approximately 0 sleep and maximum caffeine for 4 years straight. Hence the thesis idea about Lutecoin. She agreed. "I wanted to explore how cryptocurrency failures impact working-class investors differently than wealthy ones. Use your disaster as a case study." That smile again. "But like I said, my advisor thought it was too depressing, also possibly too mean." "It would have been accurate," David said. "That's what I told him." Despite everything, the shock, the revelation, the guilt churning in his stomach like bad seafood, David almost laughed. Sophia had his sense of humor. Or he had hers. Or they both had some cosmic joke's sense of humor. Whatever it was deeply weird. "So," Sophia said, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees, "now that we've established that we're not related, that you're not my absent father figure, and that your dad was a piece of work, what exactly are you doing here, David Sullivan? And why did you look like you'd seen a ghost when you spotted us?" Maria shot her a warning look. "Sophia." "What?" "I'm curious." Sophia looked back at David. "You're not here for me. You don't know me. So either you thought I was your secret daughter and were having a crisis, or—" She trailed off, waiting. David ran a hand through his hair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep tiredness that made him feel every one of his 42 years. "I'm here for my godson's graduation. Greg Thornton's kid. I didn't even know you existed until about 10 minutes ago when I saw you with Maria and thought—" He stopped. "Well, you know what I thought. That your past had come back to haunt you in the form of a biracial Harvard graduate," Sophia supplied helpfully. "Sophia, mi amor, por favor," Maria said, but there was affection in her exasperation. "I'm just saying what we're all thinking." Sophia stood up, brushing off her graduation gown. "Look, this has been super weird and mildly traumatic for everyone involved, but I have about 30 people waiting to take photos with me, and frankly, I'd like to enjoy my graduation without any more emotional bombshells." She was dismissing him, this 20-year-old who looked like him but wasn't him, who'd achieved more with less than he'd ever managed, was politely but firmly telling him to leave. David should have felt insulted. Instead, he felt something like respect. "Of course," he said. "I should get back anyway. Greg's probably wondering where I disappeared to." Sophia nodded, started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm glad you're not my father. No offense, but I like the one I got better. She squeezed Maria's shoulder. Even if she is technically my aunt. Maria's eyes were shining. She pulled Sophia into a hug, tight and fierce, the kind of embrace that contained years of sacrifice and love and survival. David watched them, these two women who'd made a family out of nothing, who'd built something beautiful out of loss, and felt profoundly aware of everything he'd never earned in his life. David, Maria said, releasing Sophia but keeping one hand on her arm. I need to ask you something. Anything. Don't tell anyone about this. About seeing us. About... She gestured vaguely at Sophia. The resemblance. People talk. People assume. And Sophia's worked too hard to have her accomplishments overshadowed by some scandalous rumor about whose daughter she might be. I won't say anything, David promised. I swear. Maria studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her because she nodded. Thank you. Sophia had already started walking back toward the main ceremony, her graduation gown billowing behind her like a cape. Maria followed, but slower. And just before she disappeared around the corner of Memorial Church, she looked back at David one more time. In that look was everything they'd never said. Every conversation they'd never had. Every apology he'd never made for his father's actions, for his own obliviousness, for the way wealthy white families used people like Maria and then erased them like inconvenient footnotes. Then she was gone. David stood alone in the garden, surrounded by roses that hadn't bloomed yet, feeling like he'd just survived a car crash he didn't see coming. His phone buzzed. Greg, probably. Or his assistant, wondering where he'd disappeared to. Or one of the 3 different venture capital firms he was supposed to call back today. He ignored it. Instead, he walked slowly back toward the ceremony, his gold suit suddenly feeling ridiculous, his expensive champagne taste souring in his mouth. The celebration continued around him. Photos, laughter, tears of joy, parents hugging their children who'd just walked across the stage into their futures. David found Greg eventually, schmoozing with a dean near the refreshment table. Congratulated Mitchell, who was indeed the kid who smelled like energy drinks and had terrible ideas about cryptocurrency, made the appropriate small talk, smiled the appropriate smiles, did all the things wealthy people do at graduations while their minds are somewhere else entirely. But he kept looking for them in the crowd, Maria and Sophia, mother and daughter in every way that mattered, even if genetics said otherwise. He spotted them once near the edge of the lawn. Sophia was laughing at something a friend had said, her cap tilted at a jaunty angle. Maria was taking photos with someone's expensive camera, being helpful the way she'd always been helpful, making sure everyone else's memories were preserved even if her own never were. They looked happy. They looked whole. They looked like they didn't need him at all. And that, David realized as he drained another glass of champagne and tried to care about whatever Greg was saying about alumni donations, was exactly how it should be. But it didn't stop him from wondering. As he walked back to his Tesla, as he drove away from Harvard with its ivy-covered buildings and its promising futures, what his life might have looked like if Maria had been his daughter. If he'd been worthy of that. If he'd been better. The answer, he suspected, was written all over Sophia's face. And it looked nothing like him at all. 3 days later, David was still thinking about them. He sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of a building in downtown Boston that he didn't own but might as well have, given how much rent his company paid annually. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the harbor that real estate agents described as breathtaking, and David described as tax-deductible. His desk was minimalist Danish design, the kind that cost more than a decent used car and was somehow supposed to represent visionary thinking. On it sat 2 computer monitors, a laptop, his phone, and a crystal paperweight he'd received for being named one of Boston's top 40 under 40 3 years ago, back when he was still under 40. He was staring at the paperweight like it might contain answers. It didn't. His assistant, Jennifer, early 30s, terrifyingly competent, the kind of person who could organize a hostile takeover and a birthday party with equal efficiency, knocked on his open door. She never just walked in anymore. Not after the incident last year when she'd caught him watching cat videos during a conference call with Tokyo. "You have the Baxter meeting in 15 minutes, she said, consulting her tablet. "Also, your ex-wife called. The second one. She wants to know if you can take Ryan this weekend because she's going to Napa with her new boyfriend." David dragged his attention away from the window. "Which ex-wife is the second one again?" Jennifer didn't even blink. "Melissa, the lawyer." "Right, Melissa." He'd been married 3 times. It was honestly hard to keep track. "Tell her yes. Tell her I'll try. Actually, tell her I'll have my assistant check my calendar and get back to her." "I am your assistant." "I know, that was a joke." "Was it?" Jennifer's expression suggested she knew exactly how many hours David had actually spent with his son in the past year, and the number was probably depressing. "Just tell her yes," David said, running a hand through his hair. "I'll figure it out." Jennifer made a note on her tablet. "The Baxter people are bringing their legal team. 4 lawyers. This is about the merger." Of course it is. Everything was about mergers lately. David's company, Sullivan Ventures, had grown from a scrappy startup accelerator into a mid-sized investment firm with fingers in about 30 different pies, from tech startups to real estate development to that weird brief period where they'd invested in artisanal pickle companies. The pickles hadn't worked out. "Do you want me to sit in?" Jennifer asked. "No, I've got Marcus handling it." Marcus Chen was his chief legal counsel, a man who could find loopholes in an ironclad contract and made opposing lawyers cry into their expensive briefcases. "But have someone bring coffee, the good stuff, from that place in the North End." "The place that charges $14 for a latte?" "That's the one. These Baxter people are old money. They'll appreciate the gesture." David paused. "Also, I want you to look someone up for me." Jennifer's fingers hovered over her tablet, ready. "Name?" "Sophia Alvarez, recent Harvard graduate, valedictorian, economics and social policy double major." If Jennifer was curious about why her boss was suddenly interested in a random Harvard graduate, she didn't show it. This was why David paid her 6 figures and gave her unlimited vacation days she never used. "What do you need?" "Everything. Where she's working, what she's doing, if she's staying in Boston." David hesitated. "But be discreet. Don't contact her. Don't let anyone know we're looking." Now Jennifer did look curious. "Is this for a recruitment thing? Because we don't usually—" "It's personal," David said, which was true but also completely inadequate. Jennifer nodded slowly. "I'll have something for you by end of day." "Thanks." She left, closing the door behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded judgmental. David turned back to his window, to the harbor view that was supposed to inspire him or impress him or whatever the hell expensive views were supposed to do. A ferry was cutting across the water, leaving a white wake behind it like a scar. Tourists probably heading to the harbor islands to take selfies and complain about the lack of Wi-Fi. He'd told Maria he wouldn't tell anyone. He'd promised, and he meant it. But he hadn't promised not to look. His phone buzzed, a text from Greg Thornton. "Lunch next week? Let's catch up properly. You disappeared at graduation like Batman." David typed back, "Sure." "Tuesday work?" Greg. "Perfect. Also, Mitchell won't stop talking about how cool you are. Something about the gold suit. Kids these days." David smiled despite himself. The gold suit had been a gift from his 3rd ex-wife, purchased during what he now recognized as a manic episode brought on by too much champagne and not enough therapy. He'd almost returned it. Glad he hadn't. His phone buzzed again. Different number. Unknown. The text read, "This is Sophia. Don't ask how I got your number. We need to talk. David stared at his screen like it had just grown teeth. Before he could respond, another text came through. Not about what you think, about something else. Something you should know. Coffee tomorrow? 10 a.m.? Thinking cup in the North End. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard. Every instinct he'd honed over 20 years of business deals and difficult negotiations was screaming at him to be cautious, to ask questions, to establish parameters. Instead, he typed, "I'll be there." 3 dots appeared, indicating she was typing. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, "Don't bring anyone. And don't tell Mama I contacted you. She'd kill me." The message was followed by a skull emoji, which somehow made the whole thing feel less ominous and more like he was being summoned by a college student who'd grown up with smartphones. David set his phone down and leaned back in his ergonomic chair that had cost $2,000 and still somehow hurt his back. What the hell was he doing? He'd promised Maria he'd stay away, promised to keep their secret, promised to let them live their lives without his interference. And now here he was, agreeing to secret coffee meetings like he was in a spy movie written by someone who'd never actually been a spy. The door opened again. Jennifer, with a printout. "Quick summary on Sophia Alvarez. Full report will take a few more hours." David took the paper. It was sparse, just a few bullet points. Harvard graduate, obviously. Economics and social policy double major, he knew that. Currently unemployed, but had accepted a position at Morgan Stanley starting in September. Junior analyst. Impressive for a recent graduate, but not unusual for a Harvard valedictorian. Listed home address was in Dorchester, the same neighborhood Maria had mentioned. No social media presence beyond LinkedIn, which was mostly professional accolades and recommendations from professors. No Instagram, no Twitter, no TikTok. Either Sophia was remarkably private or remarkably smart, probably both. "Thanks," David said, handing the paper back. "The full report. Hold off on it." Jennifer's eyebrows went up, just slightly. "Hold off?" "Yeah, I might not need it after all." She left without comment, but David could practically feel her curiosity following her out the door. He tried to focus on work, reviewed the Baxter merger documents, answered emails, joined a conference call about a startup that was trying to revolutionize dental floss with blockchain technology, which was somehow both the dumbest and most inevitable thing he'd heard all week. But his mind kept drifting back to Sophia's text. Something you should know. What could she possibly need to tell him that couldn't be said at graduation? What secret was left that hadn't already been revealed in that garden behind Memorial Church? The Baxter meeting went fine. The lawyers postured. Marcus postured back, better. They agreed to terms that everyone pretended to be happy about, shook hands with the kind of grip that was supposed to convey strength and trustworthiness, and scheduled a follow-up for next month. David barely remembered any of it. He left the office at 6, which was early for him. Usually he stayed until 8 or 9, sometimes later, working because there was nothing else to do, and going home to his empty townhouse in Back Bay felt lonelier than staying in his office. Tonight, though, he wanted to think. He drove home through evening traffic, past the common where college students were sprawled on the grass soaking up the last of the spring sunlight, past Newberry Street where tourists were paying $30 for mediocre pasta and calling it authentic. His townhouse was tucked into a quiet street that cost approximately 1 kidney per square foot. 3 stories, brick facade, the kind of place that screamed, "I have money but also taste," to anyone who cared. Inside was exactly as he'd left it that morning. Immaculate. Sterile. Decorated by an interior designer who'd used the words minimalist luxury approximately 40 times during their consultation. Everything was gray or white or that weird color that was somehow both. The art on the walls was expensive and meaningless. The furniture was uncomfortable but aesthetically pleasing. It looked like a hotel room for rich people. David poured himself a scotch, aged 21 years, older than Sophia, and sat on his uncomfortable couch, staring at his meaningless art. He thought about his son, Ryan, 14 years old and currently in rehab for the third time. Marijuana and pills, according to Melissa. Normal teenage experimentation, according to Ryan's first therapist. A cry for help, according to the second one. A symptom of deeper issues, according to the third. David knew what the deeper issue was. It was him. It was the divorce when Ryan was 6, the subsequent remarriage and second divorce by the time he was 9, the fact that his father was always working, always traveling, always too busy building an empire to notice his kid was falling apart. He took a sip of scotch. It tasted like regret and oak barrels. His phone buzzed. Ryan's therapist, asking if they could schedule a family session. David deleted the email without responding. He'd get to it later. He always got to it later. Another buzz. This time, an actual call. His first ex-wife, Catherine, mother of his older daughter, Emma, who is currently studying abroad in France and, according to her Instagram, which David stalked like a creep, having the time of her life. He let it go to voicemail. Catherine's voice came through, professional and distant. "Hi, David. Just wanted to remind you that Emma's birthday is next week. She's turning 21. I've sent you the details for the party we're throwing in Paris. I know you're busy, but it would mean a lot if you could make it. She won't say so, but I know she wants you there. Call me back." David set his phone face down on the coffee table. 21. Emma was turning 21, the same age as Sophia. Two young women, both brilliant in their own ways, both standing at the threshold of their lives. One had a father who'd paid for everything and shown up for nothing. The other had no father at all and had gotten everything that mattered. David drank more scotch and tried not to think about what that meant. The next morning, he arrived at Thinking Cup at 9:45, 15 minutes early, which was either eager or anxious, depending on your perspective. The cafe was one of those places that took coffee very seriously, with exposed brick and reclaimed wood and baristas who looked like they'd judge you for ordering a frappuccino. David ordered an espresso and found a table in the back corner, away from the window. He'd worn jeans and a simple black shirt, trying to look less like a walking tax bracket and more like a regular human being. It didn't really work. His watch alone probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but at least he'd tried. Sophia arrived exactly at 10. She was wearing ripped jeans, a vintage band t-shirt for a group David had never heard of, and white sneakers that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup. She looked like every other college student in Boston, except for those eyes. Those storm gray eyes that made her look older than 21, like she'd seen things and processed them and filed them away for future reference. She ordered something complicated: oat milk, extra shot, vanilla, some other modifications David didn't catch, and joined him at his table. "Thanks for coming," she said, settling into her chair with her coffee. "I wasn't sure you would." "You were very mysterious," David said. "Hard to resist." "I learned from TV. Every good meeting starts with a cryptic text message." She took a sip of her drink. "This is good. You picked a good spot." "This is your neighborhood," David pointed out. "You probably already knew about it." "True. I was testing you." That smile again, sharp and amused. "You passed." They sat in silence for a moment. Two people who looked alike but weren't related. Both trying to figure out how to start a conversation about something neither of them had defined yet. Finally, Sophia set her cup down and leaned forward. "I need to tell you something about your father." David's stomach clenched. "What about him?" "He didn't just harass Mama," Sophia said quietly. "He threatened her. Actually threatened her. With deportation." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Deportation," David repeated. "But Maria's American. She was born in Lawrence, Massachusetts," I know. She's as American as you are. Sophia's jaw was tight. But your father didn't care about facts. He told her that he had connections in ICE, in immigration courts, that he could make her life hell even if the case got thrown out. Said he'd tie her up in legal proceedings for years, make sure she couldn't work. Couldn't support herself. She paused. Couldn't support my mother, who was sick at the time. David felt like he'd been punched. Jesus Christ. Mama didn't tell me until I was 18. Thought I was old enough to understand. Old enough to know why we could never go back to that neighborhood. Why she worked 3 jobs instead of applying for better positions. Why she was always so careful about documentation, about taxes, about everything. Sophia's hands were wrapped around her coffee cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. She was terrified, David, for years. Your father made her terrified of the system that was supposed to protect her. David couldn't speak. His father's face swam in his memory, stern, proud, always immaculately dressed, always in control. Charles Sullivan, pillar of Boston society, philanthropist, Harvard alum, real estate magnate. Monster. I'm so sorry, David finally managed. I had no idea he was capable of... Of what? Using his power to destroy someone weaker than him? Threatening a brown woman with the government because she wouldn't sleep with him? Sophia's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. That's what powerful men do, David. That's what they've always done. Not all of them, David said weakly. No, not all of them. Sophia studied him. The question is, what kind are you? It was a fair question, a hard question, the kind of question David had been avoiding his entire adult life. I don't know, he admitted. I'd like to think I'm better than him. But I've made a lot of mistakes, hurt a lot of people, probably, just in different ways. Sophia nodded slowly, like this was the answer she'd expected. Mama thinks you're different. She told me last night, after I told her I was meeting you, which she was not happy about, by the way, that you were always kind to her when you were young, that you treated her like a person. That's a pretty low bar, David said. It is, but most people don't even clear it. Sophia took another sip of her coffee. Look, I didn't ask you here to make you feel guilty about your father. He's dead. You can't change what he did. But I did want you to know the truth. All of it. Because Mama won't tell you herself. She's too proud, too private. But I think you deserve to know what your family legacy actually is. David absorbed this. The cafe buzzed around them, espresso machines hissing, students typing on laptops, someone laughing at something on their phone. Normal life, continuing like his world wasn't being systematically dismantled one revelation at a time. Why tell me at all? He asked. Why not just let me stay ignorant? Would have been easier. Sophia leaned back, considering. Because I've spent my whole life watching Mama carry this weight alone. This secret, this trauma, this fear that your father planted in her. And I thought maybe, if you knew, if you understood, you could... She trailed off, looking frustrated. I don't know what I thought. That you'd apologize better? That you'd somehow make it right? That's stupid. You can't make it right. No, David agreed. I can't. They sat with that truth for a moment. Then Sophia said, But maybe you could try anyway. How? She pulled out her phone, scrolled for a moment, then turned the screen toward him. It showed a website. Simple design. Lots of text, photos of smiling people. This is a legal aid organization in Dorchester. They help immigrant families with documentation, deportation defense, navigating the system. Mama volunteers there sometimes, translating for clients. David looked at the website, then at Sophia. You want me to donate? I want you to fund them, Sophia corrected. Not a one-time donation, Consistent funding. Enough that they can hire more lawyers, help more families, protect more people from men like your father. She paused. Enough that your family name means something different in that neighborhood. It was a good pitch. A smart pitch. The kind of thing David would have recognized in a boardroom and respected. How much are we talking? He asked. I don't know. A lot. Enough to matter. Sophia's eyes were steady on his. I'm not trying to shake you down if that's what you're thinking. This isn't blackmail. I just think if you actually want to make amends, if you actually want to be different than your father, this is how you do it. Not with an apology, with action. David thought about his foundation, Sullivan Family Foundation, established by his father decades ago, now managed by a board that met quarterly to distribute grants to museums and symphony orchestras and colleges that already had too much money. Prestigious causes, photogenic causes, causes that got your name on buildings, not causes that actually helped people. I'll do it, he said. Sophia blinked. Just like that? Just like that. David pulled out his phone. What's the organization called? Ricey's Legal Collective. Roots? In English. Sophia was watching him like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. You're serious? I'm serious. David was already emailing Jennifer. I'll have my assistant set up a meeting with their director. We'll figure out what they need and make it happen. Why? Sophia asked. Why are you agreeing so easily? Most rich people need to be convinced, need to see reports and impact metrics and... Because you're right, David interrupted. And because I'm tired of being my father's son. Sophia studied him for a long moment, those analytical eyes searching for deception or ulterior motives. Whatever she found or didn't find seemed to satisfy her. Okay then, she said. Okay. They finished their coffee in companionable silence. David paid, insisted on paying, despite Sophia's protest that she could afford a $6 coffee. They walked out into the spring morning together, two people who weren't related but were somehow becoming connected anyway. Can I ask you something? David said as they stood on the sidewalk, about to head in different directions. Sure. What are you doing this summer? Before Morgan Stanley? Sophia shrugged. Honestly? Trying to figure out how to be a person instead of a student for the first time in my life. Maybe travel a little if I can afford it. Help Mama with the house. Normal stuff. How would you feel about an internship? Sophia's eyebrows went up. With your company? With my company. Paid, obviously. Well paid. You could work with our investment team, learn the business side of venture capital. Might be useful for your career at Morgan Stanley. Is this a nepotism thing? Sophia asked. Because we've established I'm not your daughter, so that would be weird. It's a you're smart and I need smart people thing, David said. But if you're not interested... I didn't say that. Sophia was thinking, weighing options, doing that same calculation he'd seen her do at graduation. What would I actually be doing? I don't want to be someone's coffee intern. You'd be working with Marcus Chen, my chief legal counsel, and Priya Sharma, head of our investment division. Real work, real projects, real impact on actual companies we're funding. And this isn't charity? You're not doing this because you feel guilty? I'm definitely doing this partially because I feel guilty, David admitted. But I'm also doing it because you called my failed cryptocurrency too tragic for a thesis, and that takes guts. Sophia laughed. Actually laughed. Bright and genuine. Okay. I'll think about it. Think fast. I'll need an answer by next week. Pushy. I like it. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. Thanks for the coffee, and for listening, and for not being a complete asshole about the whole thing. The bar really is low, David said. Welcome to America. Sophia started walking away, then turned back. Hey, David? Yeah? Don't tell Mama about the internship offer. Not yet. Let me figure out how to pitch it so she doesn't think I'm selling out or getting too close to your family's world. Your secret's safe with me. Sophia nodded and disappeared into the crowd of morning pedestrians, just another college graduate trying to figure out what came next. David stood there for a moment, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose, maybe. Or hope. Or possibly just the caffeine from the espresso. Whatever it was, it felt like a beginning. Sophia showed up on Monday morning at 8:47 a.m., which was both early and late depending on your perspective. Early because most interns stumbled in around 9:15, looking like they'd fought their alarm clock and lost. Late because David had been at his desk since 6:30, drinking his third coffee and pretending he wasn't nervous about a 21-year-old's first day at work. Jennifer intercepted her at reception, probably before Sophia could say something sarcastic to the front desk staff, and brought her up to the 42nd floor. David watched through his office window as Jennifer gave Sophia the tour, pointing out the conference rooms, the break area with its overpriced espresso machine, the bathrooms that had those Japanese toilets with too many buttons that nobody understood. Sophia was dressed professionally. Black slacks, white blouse, blazer that looked borrowed or thrifted but fit well enough. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She'd even toned down the sarcasm, if her facial expressions were any indication. She looked like she was trying, like she cared about making a good impression. David felt irrationally proud, which was stupid because he barely knew her and definitely hadn't raised her. Jennifer brought Sophia to his office around 9:15, knocked twice, and opened the door without waiting for a response. Sophia Alvarez, meet David Sullivan, though I understand you two have already met. Jennifer's tone was carefully neutral, but her eyes were sharp. She'd definitely figured out there was more to this story than David had told her. We've met, Sophia confirmed, stepping into the office with the kind of confidence that came from knowing you'd earned your place, not bought it. Thanks, Jennifer. Jennifer left, closing the door with slightly less judgment than usual. So, Sophia said, looking around David's office with unconcealed interest. This is where capitalism happens. This is where I answer emails and pretend to understand blockchain, David corrected. Capitalism happens on the floors below us, where people smarter than me do actual work. Sophia smiled, sat down in one of the chairs across from his desk without being invited, which he appreciated. Are you going to give me the welcome to the company speech? Tell me to work hard and respect the culture and not steal office supplies? I was going to tell you that the bathroom toilets are complicated and to be careful with the buttons, but your version works too. David leaned back in his chair. How's Maria? Still not thrilled about this, but she's dealing. I told her it's only for the summer and that I need the experience before Morgan Stanley. Sophia paused. I may have also told her you're paying me enough to help with the mortgage, which helped. How much am I paying you? I have no idea. Jennifer said she'd send me the paperwork. Sophia crossed her legs, settling in. So what am I actually doing here? And please don't say getting coffee and making copies. I can do that at Starbucks for minimum wage and free coffee. David pulled up a folder on his computer. You're going to work with Marcus Chen and Priya Sharma on due diligence for potential investments. We're looking at 3 startups right now. 1 in renewable energy, 1 in educational technology, 1 in healthcare data analytics. Your job is to help evaluate whether they're worth our money. Sophia's eyebrows went up. That's actual work. I told you it would be. Most internships are bullshit. My friend Keisha spent last summer at a consulting firm and literally did nothing but format PowerPoints for 3 months. Well, here you'll do real analysis and also format PowerPoints. We're progressive that way. David forwarded her the files. Start with the renewable energy company, Solar Wave. Read through their business plan, financial projections, market analysis. Tomorrow you'll sit in on a meeting with their founders. I want you to come prepared with questions. Sophia was already pulling out a laptop, an older model, a few years out of date but clearly well-maintained. What's the investment amount we're considering? $3 million for a 20% equity stake. She whistled low. That's a lot of money to trust to an intern's analysis. I'm not trusting it to your analysis alone. but I am interested in your perspective. You have a different lens than most people here. You understand policy implications, social impact, what happens to communities when companies scale badly. David paused. Plus, you told me my cryptocurrency was tragic, so I know you're not afraid to call bullshit when you see it. Solar wave, Sophia repeated, already opening the files he'd sent. Renewable energy. Let me guess. They're claiming they can revolutionize solar panels and save the planet while generating massive returns for investors? More or less. Yeah, I'll read the fine print. She looked up from her laptop. Where's my desk? You'll be sharing an office with 2 other analysts, Jamie and Kev. They're both good. Smart. They'll help you get oriented. David stood up. Come on, I'll introduce you. He led her down the hall to a medium-sized office with 3 desks, 2 of which were occupied. Jamie Reeves was 28, Stanford MBA, came from old money but didn't act like it. Kev Okonkwo was 30, Nigerian-American, had worked his way up from being an administrative assistant to a junior analyst through sheer competence and refusing to be intimidated by anyone. Jamie, Kev, this is Sophia Alvarez. She's interning with us for the summer. Harvard grad, just finished. She'll be working on the solar wave evaluation and whatever else Priya and Marcus throw at her. Jamie looked up from his computer and smiled. He had that easy charm that came from never having to worry about money or fitting in. Harvard, nice. What house? Lowell, Sophia said. Adam's house represent, Jamie said, like this meant something. Welcome aboard. Fair warning. We work long hours here, but David buys dinner if we're here past 8, so there's that. Kev nodded in greeting but was more reserved, studying Sophia with the careful assessment of someone who'd learned to read people fast. You're the first intern Sullivan Ventures has ever hired directly, he said. Usually we pull from MBA programs. How'd you swing this? Sophia glanced at David, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face for just a second. She impressed me, David said simply. Sometimes you meet someone and know they're going to be good at this. Sophia's one of those people. It was a non-answer that raised more questions than it solved, but Kev seemed satisfied enough. Cool. Well, welcome. Your desk is the one by the window. Sorry about the view. You can see the parking garage and part of a Dunkin' Donuts. I'm from Dorchester, Sophia said, sitting down at her new desk. Dunkin' Donuts is my heritage. Jamie laughed. Kev smiled. The tension broke. David left them to get acquainted and headed back to his office, feeling oddly nervous. This needed to work, not just because he'd promised Maria he wouldn't screw this up, but because he'd promised himself he was going to be better. And being better meant following through, meant creating actual opportunities instead of just feeling guilty about the past. His phone buzzed. A text from Maria. Sophia said she has a real desk and real work. Thank you for that. David typed back. She's going to be great. Thanks for trusting me with this. Maria. I'm not trusting you. I'm trusting her. There's a difference. Fair enough. The week progressed faster than David expected. Sophia threw herself into the work with the kind of intensity that reminded him of himself at that age. Staying late, asking questions that made people uncomfortable, challenging assumptions that had been accepted as gospel for years. She was particularly brutal on the solar wave analysis. On Thursday, they all gathered in the conference room for a meeting with Solar Wave's founders, 2 guys in their 30s who looked like they'd been dressed by a tech startup costume designer. Hoodies, expensive sneakers, the kind of casual that cost $300 per item. The founders, Tyler and Brandon, went through their pitch. Lots of talk about disruption and innovation and changing the paradigm. Lots of graphs showing projected growth that looked like hockey sticks on steroids. Sophia listened politely, took notes, didn't interrupt. Then, when they asked for questions, she raised her hand like she was still in class. Yes, Tyler said, pointing at her with the kind of smile men use when they think a young woman is about to ask a softball question they can hit out of the park. Your financial projections show a 300% year-over-year growth rate for the first 3 years, Sophia said, her voice calm and professional. But your market analysis indicates you're entering a sector that's already saturated with competitors who have better technology and more funding. How do you reconcile those numbers? Tyler's smile faltered just slightly. Well, we have a unique approach to— Your approach is to undercut competitors on price, Sophia interrupted, not rudely, just factually. Which means lower margins, which means you'd need to scale incredibly fast to make those projections work. But your operational plan doesn't account for the infrastructure costs of scaling that fast. So either your projections are wildly optimistic or you're hiding operational costs. Which is it? The room went very quiet. Brandon jumped in, trying to recover. We've got proprietary technology that reduces manufacturing costs. Your patent filing is pending and has 3 competitors with similar claims filed before yours, Sophia said, still not looking up from her notes. So, proprietary is a stretch. Also, your team page lists 12 employees, but your operational budget only accounts for 8 salaries. Are you counting on people to work for equity instead of actual money? Because that's a red flag for labor practices. David watched Tyler and Brandon exchange glances. They were sweating now, literally. There were small beads of perspiration on Tyler's forehead. Marcus Chen, sitting at the end of the table, was trying very hard not to smile. Priya Sharma, the head of investments, was openly impressed. Jamie and Kev were watching Sophia like she'd just performed a magic trick. Look, Tyler said, his voice losing some of its polish. We're a young company. There are always adjustments to be made. I'm not asking you to be perfect, Sophia said, finally looking up from her notes. I'm asking you to be honest. Your pitch is designed to sound impressive to people who don't read the fine print. But some of us do read the fine print. And what I'm seeing is a company that's built on hype instead of substance. She closed her laptop, sat back, waited. Tyler and Brandon looked at David, clearly hoping he'd intervene, smooth things over, maybe tell his intern to go easy on them. David said, Sophia makes good points. Can you address them? For the next 20 minutes, Tyler and Brandon tried. They fumbled through explanations, made promises about revised projections, talked about pivots and adjustments and strategic recalibrations. It was painful to watch. Finally, David ended the meeting. Thank you for coming in. We'll review everything and get back to you next week. Translation: Thanks, but no thanks. Tyler and Brandon left looking deflated, their hoodies somehow less impressive than when they'd arrived. After they were gone, Priya burst out laughing. Oh my God, Sophia, that was beautiful. I've been trying to get David to pass on Solar Wave for weeks, but he wanted to give them a chance. They seemed nice, David said defensively. They're con artists in sneakers, Priya said. Sophia saw it in 5 minutes. Well done. Sophia looked slightly embarrassed. I didn't mean to be harsh. They just reminded me of guys I knew in college who thought they could talk their way into anything without actually doing the work. Harsh is what we need more of, Marcus said. This business is full of people selling dreams. Someone has to ask if the dreams make sense. Jamie leaned over. That was intense, also kind of awesome. Where did you learn to read financials like that? My econ professor at Harvard was a former SEC investigator, Sophia said. She taught us to look for what companies weren't saying as much as what they were. Said most fraud happens in the assumptions, not the numbers. David felt that strange pride again. Sophia had been here 4 days, and she'd already saved his company from making a $3 million mistake. After the meeting dispersed, he caught up with her in the hallway. That was impressive. Sophia shrugged. It was obvious once you actually looked at their numbers. I'm surprised nobody else caught it. People did. Priya's been skeptical, but sometimes I want to believe in things even when the evidence doesn't support it. David paused. It's a weakness. It's optimism, Sophia corrected. Which isn't terrible. You just need someone around to balance it with realism. Is that going to be your role here? Resident realist? Someone has to do it. She smiled. Besides, saying no to bad investments is way more satisfying than I expected. Is this what you do all day? Crush people's dreams? Sometimes. Other times we fund dreams that actually make sense. David glanced at his watch. It's almost 7. You've been here since 8:47. Go home. Eat dinner with Maria. Tell her you're doing good work. Sophia hesitated. Are you sure? Jamie and Kev are still here? Their salary. Your intern hourly. Go home. I'm intern salary, actually. Jennifer's paperwork was very generous. Sophia grabbed her bag from her desk. But okay. Thanks, David, for this. For all of it. She left before he could respond, which was probably for the best, because David wasn't sure what he would have said anyway. Friday afternoon, David got a call from Catherine, his first ex-wife and Emma's mother. I'm checking on Paris logistics, she said without preamble. Catherine didn't believe in small talk. It was one of the reasons their marriage had lasted 8 years instead of 3 like the others. Your flight gets in Thursday at noon. The party is Friday at 8. I've made arrangements for you to stay at the George V, separate from where Emma and I are staying, obviously, because I don't need that awkwardness. Thanks, Catherine. Emma's excited you're coming. Surprised, but excited. There was a pause. Don't disappoint her, David. She's had enough of that. The words stung because they were true. I won't. Good. Catherine's tone softened slightly. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're coming. She needs her father, even if you've been a mediocre one. High praise. It's realistic praise. Anyway, I have to go. See you Thursday. She hung up before David could respond, which was vintage Catherine. She'd been a corporate attorney when they met, still was, though now she ran her own firm in Manhattan and made more money than David did in a good year. She'd divorced him because he worked too much and cared too little, which seemed ironic given her own workaholic tendencies. But fair enough. Their daughter Emma was the one good thing they'd produced together. Smart, creative, funny in ways neither of her parents were. David had missed most of her childhood building his company. Missed school plays and soccer games and parent-teacher conferences. Showed up for graduations and birthdays when he remembered. Sent checks when he didn't. He was determined to do better. Had to do better. Watching Sophia with Maria had shown him what actual parenting looked like, what it meant to show up consistently instead of sporadically, to be present instead of just present, adjacent. He spent the rest of Friday afternoon trying to focus on work, but mostly thinking about Paris, about Emma, about whether it was possible to repair relationships that had been neglected for 20 years. Around 6, Sophia knocked on his office door. Hey, can I ask you something? Sure, come in. She sat down, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Mama wants to meet you, like, properly, not just run into you at a graduation or talk on the phone. She wants to have dinner. David's stomach did something complicated. When? Tomorrow night, at our house. She's cooking. Sophia paused. I know it's weird. You don't have to if you don't want to. I can tell her you're busy. I'll be there, David said. What time? 7. I'll text you the address. Sophia stood up. Fair warning, she's going to interrogate you. Ask about your intentions, your character, whether you're using me to feel better about your family's legacy. All the hits. I expected nothing less. Also, dress casual. Like, actually casual. Not rich person pretending to be casual. Just jeans and a normal shirt. David looked down at his current outfit. Tailored slacks, designer button-down, Italian leather shoes. I can do casual. Sophia looked skeptical. Can you, though? I'll try. Good enough. She headed for the door, then turned back. David? Yeah? Thanks for this week. I know I've been kind of intense, but this has been really good. Better than I expected. You've been great, Sophia. Better than I expected, too. She smiled, that asymmetrical smile that was his, but wasn't, and left. David sat alone in his office as the sun set over Boston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that looked fake but weren't. He thought about tomorrow night, about sitting across from Maria in her home, eating food she'd cooked with her own hands, answering questions about who he was and who he wanted to be. It felt important, like a test he hadn't studied for but desperately needed to pass. His phone buzzed. Sophia's text with the address, a street in Dorchester he'd never been to, in a neighborhood his GPS would probably warn him about, in a part of the city that people like him usually only saw from highway overpasses. David typed back, "See you at 7. Should I bring anything?" Sophia, "Wine would be good. Nothing too expensive. Mama will judge you if you show up with something that costs more than her monthly grocery bill." David, "How much does her monthly grocery bill cost?" Sophia, "That was a test and you failed it. Just bring wine that's under $30. David smiled at his phone and promised himself he'd find something exactly right. Good enough to show respect, modest enough to prove he understood the assignment. Tomorrow night, he'd sit at Maria's table and answer her questions and try to be the kind of man who deserved a second chance. And maybe, if he was lucky, she'd believe him. David spent Saturday morning doing something he hadn't done in years, shopping for wine at a regular store. Not the boutique place in Back Bay where they knew his name and his credit card limit. Not the fancy wine shop where everything came with a sommelier's pretentious description and a price tag that made you question your life choices. Just a regular liquor store in Southie, the kind with fluorescent lights and linoleum floors, and a guy behind the counter who was watching a Red Sox game on a small TV and didn't care who David was. He stood in the wine aisle for 20 minutes like an idiot, holding bottles and reading labels, trying to figure out what said, "I respect you," without also saying, "I'm a rich asshole who doesn't understand normal people." Under $30, Sophia had said, which was hilarious because David usually spent more than that on coffee in a week. Finally, he settled on a Spanish Rioja for $23. It had good reviews on the little card beneath it, and Spain felt appropriate somehow. Maria's heritage, even though she'd been born in Massachusetts. It was thoughtful without being try-hard, he hoped. Back home, he stood in his walk-in closet, which was larger than most people's bedrooms and made him feel vaguely guilty about that fact, trying to figure out what actually casual meant. His version of casual was still designer jeans that cost $400 and cashmere sweaters that required special dry cleaning. But Sophia had been clear. Normal casual. Real casual. The kind of casual that regular people wore. He dug to the back of his closet and found jeans he'd bought maybe 5 years ago and worn twice. Regular Levi's. Still had the tags on them, which was embarrassing. He pulled them on. They fit, barely, and found a plain gray t-shirt that didn't have any obvious designer labels. Threw a navy blue cardigan over it because going completely without a layer felt too vulnerable. Looked at himself in the mirror. He looked like a dad trying to pick up his kid from soccer practice, or a tech CEO trying to seem relatable at a company picnic. Good enough. The address Sophia had sent was in Dorchester, about 20 minutes from his townhouse, but feeling like a different universe. David drove his Tesla, then halfway there realized that showing up in a $70,000 electric car might send the wrong message. Too late now. He'd just have to park it and hope nobody keyed it. The neighborhood was working-class residential, triple-deckers and small single-family homes with chain-link fences and yards that were mostly concrete. Kids playing basketball in driveways. Someone's grandmother sitting on a porch with a fan, watching the street like it was better than television. Music coming from open windows, salsa, hip-hop, something that might have been Cape Verdean. Maria's house was a small, single-story with yellow siding that needed repainting, and a garden in front that was clearly loved. Roses, tomato plants, something with purple flowers David couldn't name. The kind of house that had been maintained with care but not money. The kind that said home instead of investment property. David parked on the street, grabbed his bottle of wine, and walked up the cracked concrete path to the front door. His heart was doing something stupid and arrhythmic. He was 42 years old and worth 8 figures, and he was nervous about having dinner with his ex-maid and her niece. The absurdity wasn't lost on him. He rang the doorbell, heard footsteps inside. Sophia opened the door wearing ripped jeans and a faded Harvard t-shirt, her hair down and wild around her face. "You actually dressed casual," she said, sounding impressed. "I half expected you to show up in a polo shirt with a popped collar and boat shoes." "I don't own boat shoes." "Really?" "I figured it came with the rich white guy starter pack." She stepped aside to let him in. "Come on. Mama's in the kitchen pretending she's not stressed about this." The house was small but lived in the best way. Photos everywhere. Sophia at various ages, Maria with people who must have been family, places David didn't recognize. The furniture was mismatched but comfortable looking. The TV was old but worked. Books were stacked on every available surface. Novels, textbooks, cookbooks with worn spines. It smelled like garlic and sofrito and something sweet baking in the oven. It smelled like home in a way David's townhouse never had. Maria emerged from the kitchen wearing jeans and a simple blue blouse, her hair pulled back, an apron tied around her waist. She looked younger than she had at graduation, more relaxed. Or maybe just on her own turf where she didn't have to be anything other than herself. "David," she said, and there was something in the way she said his name, not unfriendly but careful, measuring. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me." He held out the wine bottle. "I brought this." "I hope it's okay." Maria took it, examined the label, and smiled slightly. "Rioja. My father used to drink this on special occasions. Good choice." David felt stupidly pleased with himself. "Dinner will be ready in about 30 minutes, Maria said. "Sophia, get David something to drink. I need to check the pernal." She disappeared back into the kitchen, leaving David alone with Sophia in the small living room. "Pernal is roasted pork shoulder," Sophia explained, heading to the kitchen. "It's been cooking since like noon. The whole house has smelled amazing all day. What do you want to drink? We have beer, wine, or some juice that might be expired but probably isn't." "Beer's fine." Sophia returned with 2 bottles, something local, not fancy, just good beer. They sat on the couch, which was more comfortable than David's designer furniture, and probably cost 1/10 as much. "She's nervous," Sophia said quietly. "About tonight, about you being here. She won't admit it, but I can tell." "I'm nervous too." "Good. You should be. This is weird." Sophia took a sip of her beer. "But also kind of nice? I don't know. I've never had anyone over who knew both parts of my life, the Harvard part and the Dorchester part. Usually people are one or the other." "What about your friends from school?" "They're great, but they don't really get this." Sophia gestured around the small house. "They're nice about it, but there's always this distance, like they're tourists in my real life. You're different because you came from wealth, but you knew Mama when she was working for your family. You've seen both sides." David thought about that. "I'm not sure I really saw anything back then. I was too absorbed in my own life to pay attention to anyone else's." "Yeah, but you see it now. That's what matters." From the kitchen came the sound of pots clanging, Maria humming something under her breath. The domesticity of it all, the cooking sounds, the lived-in house, the casual comfort, made David's chest hurt in a way he couldn't quite name. This was what he'd never had, what he'd never created, despite 3 marriages and 2 kids and a house that cost more than most people made in a decade. "Can I ask you something?" David said. "Sure. Why did you really push for this dinner? I mean, I'm glad to be here, but you could have just kept our relationship professional, the internship done. Why invite me into your actual life? Sophia was quiet for a moment, peeling the label off her beer bottle. Because Mama needs to stop carrying all this weight alone. The secrets, the fear, the past. She's been protecting me from your family's drama my whole life, but I'm not a kid anymore. And I think she needs to see that you're not your father. That some things can be different than she expects. That's a lot of pressure to put on a dinner. Yeah, well, welcome to immigrant family dynamics. Everything is high stakes. Sophia smiled. Plus, Mama's pernil is incredible, and I thought you should experience real food instead of whatever expensive bullshit you usually eat. I eat Thai takeout. From a place that probably has cloth napkins and a wine list. Fair point. Maria emerged from the kitchen, untying her apron. Okay, dinner's almost ready. David, come help me set the table. It felt like a test. David followed her to the small dining area, really just an extension of the living room with a table that sat four. Maria handed him plates, silverware, napkins. They worked in silence for a moment, the kind of comfortable quiet that comes from shared tasks. The house is lovely, David said, because it was true and because the silence was getting heavy. It's small, Maria said, but it's ours. Bought it 8 years ago. First in my family to own property in this country. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. That's incredible, Maria. It is. She set down glasses for water, wine. Your father used to talk about real estate at dinner sometimes, how property was the only real wealth, how everything else was just money that could disappear. I listened to those conversations while serving food I'd cooked, in a house I'd cleaned, knowing I'd never own anything. David didn't know what to say to that. But I was wrong, Maria continued, her voice softer now. I did own something. I owned my dignity, my choices, my daughter's future. Those things your father couldn't buy, couldn't take away, no matter how hard he tried. She looked at David then, really looked at him. You're not him, David. I can see that. Sophia sees it too. But I need to know, are you here because you feel guilty, or because you actually care about what happens to us? It was the question David had been avoiding asking himself. Both, he said honestly. I feel guilty as hell about what my father did, about my own obliviousness. But I also... He paused, searching for the right words. I also care. About Sophia doing well, about your organization getting funded properly, about being someone who does the right thing instead of just feeling bad about not doing it. Maria studied his face for a long moment. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy something. Okay, she said. That's honest. I can work with honest. Sophia appeared in the doorway. Are we having feelings in here? Should I come back? We're setting the table, Maria said. Go get the pernil out of the oven. Use the good mitts, not the burned ones. Yes, chef. Sophia disappeared. Maria smiled slightly. She's happy here, at your company. Comes home talking about due diligence and market analysis and how Jamie makes terrible jokes about spreadsheets. She's good at the work. Better than good. She saved us from making a bad investment this week. I know. She told me. Very proud of herself. Maria paused. Thank you for that. For giving her real work, real responsibility. She's had to fight for everything her whole life. It's nice when something comes from respect instead of struggle. Dinner was served family style. The pernil, which was indeed incredible, all crispy skin and tender meat that fell apart at the touch of a fork. Rice and beans cooked with sofrito. Fried plantains. A salad with avocado and tomatoes. Simple food, made with skill and love, better than any meal David had eaten at restaurants where the plates cost more than this entire dinner. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easier than David expected. Maria told stories about Sophia growing up, the time she'd corrected her third-grade teacher's math, The time she'd organized a protest about the school's lunch quality. The time she'd read all of David's published articles and declared his writing technically competent but emotionally distant. "I was 14, Sophia protested, "and I stand by that assessment." "It's accurate," David admitted. Maria asked about his life. Careful questions, not prying, but genuinely curious. About his company, his kids, what he did when he wasn't working. David found himself being more honest than usual, admitting that he worked too much and parented too little, that his townhouse felt empty, that success hadn't brought him the satisfaction he'd expected. "Money is like that," Maria said, refilling his wine glass with the Rioja he'd brought. "It solves problems, but it doesn't create meaning. That has to come from somewhere else." "Where did you find yours?" David asked. Maria looked at Sophia, smiled. "Right here. The day Veronica made me promise to raise her daughter, I found my meaning. Everything after that was just logistics." The love in her voice was so pure, so uncomplicated, that David felt something crack in his chest. This was what family was supposed to look like. Not transactional, not conditional, just present and fierce and unwavering. After dinner, Sophia insisted on cleaning up, shooing Maria and David to the living room with fresh coffee. They sat on the comfortable couch, the evening light coming through the windows painting everything in soft gold. "She's remarkable," David said quietly. "Sophia, you raised someone remarkable." "I know," Maria's voice was proud. "She's better than me. Smarter, stronger. She's going to do things I never could. She already has." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to Sophia clattering around in the kitchen, singing something off-key. "David," Maria said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you ever come looking for me? After I left. You were young, but you weren't stupid. You must have known something was wrong." David took a breath. It was a fair question. A hard question. "Honestly, I think I chose not to see it. It was easier to accept my parents' explanations than to dig deeper and find out something that would force me to take sides. I was a coward." "You were 19. That's not an excuse." "No," Maria agreed. "But it's a reason, and reasons matter, even when they're uncomfortable." She paused. "I'm glad you see it now, though. Glad you're trying to be better." "Am I, though? Or am I just trying to feel less guilty?" "Maybe both. Maybe that's okay." Maria smiled. "Guilt can be useful if it makes you change. Useless if it just makes you feel bad." Sophia emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Deep conversation in here? Should I leave you two alone to process your generational trauma?" "We're done processing," Maria said. "For now. David, would you like dessert? I made flan." "Of course you did," Sophia said, "because the pernil and plantains weren't enough. We had to go full Puerto Rican grandmother on him." "I'm not a grandmother," Maria protested. "Not yet, but you've got the cooking skills locked down." The flan was perfect, silky, sweet, with just the right amount of caramel. They ate it while Sophia told them about the other startups she'd been analyzing, about the healthcare data analytics company that was actually legitimate, and the educational technology company that was basically just Khan Academy with worse marketing. Around 9:30, David stood to leave. The evening had stretched longer than he'd expected, comfortable in a way he hadn't anticipated. "Thank you," he said to Maria at the door. "For dinner, for your honesty, for giving me a chance." "Thank you for coming," Maria said. "For listening, for being different than I expected." Sophia walked him out to his car. The neighborhood was quieter now, just the distant sound of traffic and someone's TV through an open window. "So," Sophia said, leaning against his Tesla and looking decidedly unimpressed by it. "That wasn't so bad, right?" "It was really good, actually. Mama likes you, I can tell. She wouldn't have told those stories about me if she didn't trust you." The math protest story was my favorite. I was very passionate about fraction education. Sophia smiled. Also, I've been thinking about your offer to work at Sullivan Ventures after I finish at Morgan Stanley, like long term. David's heart did something complicated. Yeah? Yeah, I mean, I need to do the Morgan Stanley thing first, prove I can make it in traditional finance, but after that, maybe 2 years I'd be interested in coming back, if the offer's still open. It will be. Cool. Sophia pushed off from his car. Now go home before Mama thinks we're out here planning to overthrow capitalism or something. David laughed, got in his car, started the engine. As he pulled away from the curb, he looked in his rearview mirror and saw Sophia and Maria standing in the doorway of their small yellow house, silhouetted by the warm light from inside. Maria's arm was around Sophia's shoulders. They were talking about something, probably him, maybe laughing. They looked complete. And David realized, with a strange mixture of sadness and hope, that he wanted that for himself. Not their life exactly, but that feeling, that sense of home and purpose and love that didn't come from money or success or any of the things he'd been chasing for 20 years. He drove back to his empty townhouse in Back Bay, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like arriving home. It felt like arriving at the place he slept between the moments that actually mattered. David returned to Boston on Sunday evening, feeling like he'd been gone for a month instead of 4 days. Paris already felt like a dream. The bistros, the museums, Emma's laugh, Catherine's grudging approval, the strange sensation of actually being present in his own life instead of watching it happen from a distance. The Tesla knew the way home by itself, practically. David drove on autopilot through familiar streets, past the Common where college students were sprawled on blankets despite the evening chill, past Newbury Street where the restaurants were full of people having brunches that cost more than some families spent on groceries in a week. His townhouse was exactly as he'd left it. Immaculate. Empty. The kind of clean that came from nobody actually living there, just existing between the moments that mattered. He dropped his bag in the bedroom, poured himself a scotch he didn't really want, and stood at his window looking out at the city lights. His phone had been relatively quiet on the flight. Jennifer had handled everything as usual. Marcus had closed the deal on a promising AI startup. Priya had scheduled meetings for the educational technology company that Sophia had deemed actually legitimate. Everything had continued without him, which should have been reassuring but instead felt vaguely depressing. His phone buzzed. Sophia. Welcome back to reality. How's the post-Paris depression? David smiled despite himself. Is it that obvious? Sophia. You spent 4 days in the most beautiful city in the world reconnecting with your daughter. Now you're back in Boston where it's cold and everyone's angry about the tea. Yeah, it's obvious. David. The tea? Sophia. The subway. Keep up, old man. Anyway, I finished the healthcare analytics report. Want me to send it tonight or wait until tomorrow? David. Tomorrow's fine. How was your weekend? Sophia. Good. Mama and I went to this Dominican festival in Roxbury, ate too much mango, listened to bachata, watched people dance who are way better at it than me. Normal stuff. There was something about the casualness of that text, the mention of a festival David had never heard of, food he'd never tried, a whole vibrant world existing parallel to his own expensive emptiness, that made his chest hurt. David. Sounds nice. Sophia. It was. You should come next time. Mama would love watching you try to dance bachata. David. I don't dance. Sophia. Exactly. That's what would make it entertaining. David set his phone down and drank his scotch. Thinking about festivals in Roxbury and daughters who were becoming people he actually knew, and the strange way his life was splitting into before and after. Before Sophia, before Maria, before he'd realized how much he'd been missing while building his empire of expensive nothing. Monday morning arrived too early and too cold. David was at his desk by 7, working through the accumulated emails and decisions that had piled up during his absence. Jennifer appeared at 8 with coffee and her tablet, already talking through the week's schedule before David had fully processed being back. "Welcome home. Good trip?" she asked, not really waiting for an answer. "You have the Raices meeting at 10. Their director and 2 board members are coming here. The educational technology people at 2. Priya wants 30 minutes to discuss the AI startup Marcus closed, and your son's therapist called again about family sessions." David paused mid-email. "Ryan's therapist?" "Yes." Third message. "I told her you'd call back." Jennifer's tone was carefully neutral, which meant she was judging him. "I'll call her today." "Will you?" "Yes, Jennifer. I will actually call her today." Jennifer made a note on her tablet, clearly skeptical. "The Races people are bringing a detailed budget proposal. They're excited about the potential partnership but also cautious. Apparently they've had wealthy donors promise things before and not follow through. We're following through. I know. I'm just telling you, they're going to need convincing." Jennifer headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Sophia's been here since 7:30. Found her in the break room making coffee and reading financial statements like a normal person reads the newspaper." David smiled. "She's dedicated. She's something." Jennifer left, closing the door with that same soft click that definitely still sounded judgmental. David found Sophia in her shared office, indeed reading financial statements with the kind of focus most people reserved for novels or their phones. Jamie and Kev weren't in yet, probably wouldn't be until 9, like normal humans. "You're here early," David said from the doorway. Sophia looked up, smiled. "Couldn't sleep. Too excited about the healthcare report. Want to hear my findings?" "Hit me." For the next 20 minutes, Sophia walked him through her analysis of Med data analytics, their business model, their technology, their team, their market potential. She'd done deep research, found 3 similar companies for comparison, analyzed their growth trajectories and failure points, and created a detailed risk assessment that was better than what most of his senior analysts produced. "Bottom line," Sophia said, pulling up a summary slide she'd made, "they're solid. Their tech actually works. Their team knows what they're doing, and they're addressing a real problem in healthcare data management. The risk is moderate. Healthcare regulations are unpredictable, and their timeline for FDA approvals might be optimistic. But overall, I'd recommend we invest. Conditionally." "Conditionally?" "They need a stronger CFO. Their current one is a nice guy, but he's in over his head. I'd make the investment contingent on them hiring someone with more experience." Sophia closed her laptop. "Also, their marketing materials are terrible. They're engineers trying to sell to hospitals and they sound like they're writing academic papers. They need someone who can translate technical jargon into language that hospital administrators understand." David leaned against the door frame, impressed despite himself. "You got all that from reading their business plan and financial statements?" "I also called 3 of their current clients pretending to be a potential customer, asked a lot of questions, learned a lot." Sophia grinned. "Was that corporate espionage? Did I do a crime?" "That was market research, and it was smart." David paused. "I'm meeting with the educational technology company this afternoon. Want to sit in?" Sophia's eyes lit up. "Really?" "Really? You've earned it." "Hell yes." "I'll prepare questions." She was already pulling up files on her computer. "Oh, and David, I heard you're meeting with Races this morning. That's my mom's organization, the one where she volunteers." "I know. Just so you know, she's going to be there. She's on the board. I probably should have mentioned that earlier, but I wanted to see your face when you found out." Sophia was trying not to smile. "You're enjoying this?" "Little bit. You'll be fine. Just be yourself. The new self, not the old self who was kind of a dick. Thanks for the pep talk." "Anytime." At 10 o'clock, David waited in the conference room as Jennifer escorted the Raices delegation up from reception. 3 people, a woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Rosa Martinez, the executive director, a younger man named Luis, who handled their legal programs, and Maria. Maria, wearing professional clothes, a simple gray dress and blazer, looking simultaneously comfortable and slightly out of place in Sullivan Ventures' gleaming conference room. Their eyes met. She smiled slightly, a greeting that contained acknowledgement of the strangeness of this moment. "Thank you for having us," Rosa said, settling into a chair and pulling out a laptop. "We're grateful for your interest in our work." "I'm grateful for the work you do," David replied, then realized how that sounded, like wealthy white guy performing gratitude. "Sophia told me about your organization, about the families you help. It's important work." Rosa exchanged a glance with Maria. "Sophia Alvarez? She mentioned you might be reaching out. She's one of our most dedicated volunteers when she's not at school. She's interning here now. For the summer." "We know," Luis said. "She sent us an email saying we should take this meeting seriously because you were legit trying to make amends for your family's fucked up legacy." Her words. David couldn't help but smile. "That sounds like her." "It does," Maria agreed softly. For the next hour, they talked about Raices, about the families they served, the legal challenges they faced, the gaps in funding that made it impossible to hire enough staff or take on enough cases. Rosa was passionate but practical, laying out exactly what they needed and why. "We're not looking for charity," Rosa said firmly. "We're looking for partnership, consistent funding that lets us plan beyond the next grant cycle, lets us hire good people and keep them, lets us actually make a difference instead of just triaging crises." "That's what I want to provide," David said. He pulled up the proposal he'd had Jennifer prepare. 5 years of funding, starting at $500,000 annually with built-in increases. Enough to hire 2 more lawyers, an administrative coordinator, and expand their office space. Rosa's eyes widened. Luis looked like he might cry. Maria sat very still, her hands folded on the table. "This is—" Rosa stopped, started again. "Mr. Sullivan, this is more than we've received in total funding over the past 3 years combined." "It's what you need to do the work properly," David said. "I'm not interested in symbolic gestures. I want Raices to have the resources to help as many families as possible, to protect people from the kind of threats my father made to Maria. To make my family name mean something different in your community." The last part came out more raw than he'd intended, more honest. Maria was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe, or hope, or just careful assessment to see if he'd follow through. "We accept," Rosa said, her voice thick with emotion. "And thank you. Truly. This will change everything for us." They spent another 30 minutes working through logistics, contracts, reporting requirements, how the funding would be distributed. Luis was already making notes about the lawyers they could hire. Rosa was talking about families they'd had to turn away who they could now help. When they finally stood to leave, Rosa and Luis headed out first, talking excitedly. Maria lingered behind. "David," she said quietly, once they were alone. "This is a good thing you're doing, an important thing. It's the least I can do." "No, it's not. The least you could do is nothing. Most people in your position do nothing." Maria paused. "Thank you. For seeing us, for listening, for following through. Thank you for giving me the chance." David hesitated. "How are you doing? Really?" "I'm good. Better than good, actually. Sophia's happy at work, which makes me happy. The house needs a new roof, but that's always true. Life is life." Maria smiled. "How was Paris?" "Good. Really good. I spent actual time with Emma, had real conversations, didn't check my phone every 5 minutes." "That's growth. That's what everyone keeps telling me." David ran a hand through his hair. I keep waiting to mess this up, to fall back into old patterns, to prove that I'm exactly who I've always been. Maybe you are exactly who you've always been, Maria said, just finally letting yourself become it. The words settled into David's chest, gentle and true. Sophia's been good for you, Maria continued. I can see it. She challenges you in ways most people probably don't. She does. It's terrifying and also exactly what I need. David paused. She wants to come back after Morgan Stanley. Work here long term. I said yes. Maria's expression flickered, something protective and worried crossing her face. David, promise me something. Anything. Promise me you're not trying to replace something with her. She's not your daughter. She's not here to fix whatever's broken in your relationship with your own kids. Maria's voice was gentle but firm. She's just Sophia, and Sophia deserves to be seen as herself, not as a reflection of your guilt or your desire to be better. The observation hit David like a cold bucket of water. You're right. Yeah, you're right. I know I am. I've been watching men project things onto Sophia her whole life. Men who see her intelligence and her drive and think it's about them somehow. Don't be one of those men. I won't. I'll try not to be. Good. Maria headed for the door, then turned back. Also, she told me about your speech at Emma's birthday, about promising to be present. That was brave. It was necessary. It was both. Maria smiled. Keep being brave, David. It suits you. After she left, David sat alone in the conference room for a long time, thinking about daughters and promises and the way good intentions could curdle into something else if you weren't careful. He pulled out his phone and did something he'd been avoiding for weeks, called Ryan's therapist. She answered on the second ring. Mr. Sullivan, I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about family sessions. I know. I'm sorry. I've been avoiding it because I'm not good at therapy, and I'm definitely not good at admitting I've failed my son. The therapist, Dr. Chen, he remembered, was quiet for a moment. That's more honest than most parents manage on their first call. Okay, let's schedule something. When can you come to California? This week is bad. Next week I could do Wednesday or Thursday. Let's say Thursday, 2 p.m. And Mr. Buzz Sullivan? Yes. Ryan's not expecting much from you, so anything you show up with, honesty, vulnerability, actual presence, will be more than he's used to. Don't overthink it. After they hung up, David sat with that for a while. His son was in rehab, expecting nothing from his father because his father had given him nothing to expect. But maybe, it wasn't too late to change that. The meeting with the educational technology company went well. Sophia asked sharp questions that made the founders sweat, but also made them better explain their vision. David found himself watching her work, the way she tilted her head when she was skeptical, the way she took notes with fierce concentration, the way she could be brutally honest without being cruel. After the meeting, Jamie pulled David aside. She's really good. Like scary good. Are we keeping her after the summer? That's the plan. Good, because if we don't, someone else will scoop her up and we'll regret it. That evening, David stayed late at the office working on contracts and thinking about family therapy, and wondering if it was possible to become a different person in your 40s, or if you were basically locked into whoever you'd been at 25, just with more money and better furniture. Around 8, Sophia knocked on his door. Hey, we're ordering dinner. Thai food. You in? Who's we? Me, Jamie, Kev, Priya. Marcus said maybe, but probably not because he has a date with someone he met on one of those apps where you swipe based on people's jobs or something. That's LinkedIn. No, it's a dating app for professionals, which is somehow both more and less depressing than regular dating apps. Sophia leaned against the doorframe. So, Thai food? David realized he was hungry, realized he wanted company more than he wanted to go home to his empty townhouse and eat takeout alone. Yeah, I'm in. They ordered too much food and ate it in the conference room, spreading out papers and laptops and having the kind of rambling conversation that happened when smart people were tired and well-fed. They talked about the educational technology company, about whether AI would actually revolutionize learning or just make things worse, about Jamie's terrible dating life, and Kev's obsession with vintage sneakers, and Priya's theory that all venture capital was basically just rich people gambling on nerd ideas. Sophia held her own in the conversation, sometimes better than her own, making jokes and observations that had everyone laughing. David watched her fit into his team, become part of the group, and felt that strange pride again, the kind he had no right to feel but felt anyway. Around 10, they finally cleaned up and started heading home. David walked Sophia to her car, an ancient Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a bumper sticker that said, Harvard, because Princeton was too easy. That's ironic, David said, pointing at the sticker. That's the point. Sophia unlocked her car. Thanks for including me tonight, for treating me like part of the team instead of just the summer intern. You are part of the team. Yeah, but you could have made it weird. Made me feel like I only got this because of guilt or charity or whatever, but you didn't. So thanks. She got in her car and drove away, leaving David standing in the parking garage thinking about what Maria had said, about not projecting onto Sophia, about letting her be herself instead of a redemption narrative he was writing. He drove home and called Emma. She answered on the third ring, sounding sleepy. Dad? It's like 4 a.m. here. Sorry, I forgot about the time difference. David felt like an idiot. I'll call back later. No, it's okay. I'm up now. What's going on? Everything okay? Everything's fine. I just wanted to tell you that I talked to Ryan's therapist today. We're doing family therapy next Thursday. Silence on the other end. Then, really? Really? Dad, that's huge. That's actually huge. Emma's voice was more awake now, energized. Ryan needs that. He needs you to show up for him like you showed up for me in Paris. I know. I'm going to try. Don't try, do it, Yoda wisdom and all that. David smiled. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention. Emma yawned. Okay, I really do need to go back to sleep. But Dad, I'm proud of you for doing this. After they hung up, David sat in his living room in the dark, listening to the city hum outside his windows. His phone buzzed, a text from Sophia with a photo of her and Maria, both of them laughing at something off camera, looking happy and whole and complete. Sophia's message. Mama says thank you for the meeting today. Also says you better not fuck this up because she's cautiously starting to believe you're not a complete disaster. David. Tell her I'll try not to be a complete disaster. Sophia. I told her that's the best we can hope for. David set his phone down and poured himself a scotch, but this time when he drank it, it didn't taste bitter. It tasted like possibility. Like maybe, just maybe, he was finally becoming someone worth believing in. The flight to California felt longer than the flight to Paris, even though it was shorter. David spent most of it staring out the window at clouds and farmland, trying to prepare himself for seeing Ryan, and inevitably failing, because how do you prepare for facing your own failures wrapped in your 14-year-old son's addiction? Dr. Chen had sent him preparatory materials, articles about family dynamics in addiction, worksheets about communication patterns, a deeply uncomfortable questionnaire about his own childhood that David had filled out on his laptop at 2 a.m. when he couldn't sleep. The rehab facility was in Malibu, because of course it was. Wealthy people sent their broken children to places with ocean views and yoga classes and therapy horses, as if expensive scenery could fix what money and neglect had broken in the first place. David's second ex-wife, Melissa, met him in the parking lot. She looked tired, the kind of tired that came from months of worry etched into your face until it became permanent architecture. "You're actually here," she said, not quite believing it. "I said I would be." "You say a lot of things, David." But her voice was softer than usual, less angry. "Come on. Dr. Chen's waiting." The facility was exactly what David expected. Tasteful, calm, designed to feel like a spa rather than a place where teenagers learn to stop destroying themselves. They were led to a small therapy room with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle and windows overlooking the ocean. Dr. Chen was a small woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the kind of gentle firmness that probably made teenagers want to both trust her and test her boundaries. Ryan was already there, sitting in one of the chairs, looking smaller than David remembered. He'd lost weight. His hair was longer. He had that particular teenage posture that tried to take up as little space as possible, like he was apologizing for existing. "Ryan," David said, and his voice cracked slightly. "Dad." Ryan didn't look up. They sat. Dr. Chen explained the ground rules. Honesty, respect, no interrupting, no phones. David and Melissa both nodded like students being given instructions. "Ryan," Dr. Chen began gently, "do you want to start? Tell your parents what you've been working on in therapy?" Ryan picked at a thread on his jeans. "I guess. We've been talking about why I started using, not just the drugs are bad stuff, but like the actual reasons. The feelings I was trying to avoid." "And what feelings were those?" Dr. Chen prompted. "Lonely, I guess. And like invisible. Like I could disappear and nobody would notice except maybe the housekeeper when she cleaned my room." Ryan finally looked up, not at David, but at the ocean through the window. "Mom was always working. Dad was always working. And I was just there. This kid they had because people like them are supposed to have kids. But neither of them actually wanted to deal with me." The words landed like punches. Melissa's face crumpled. "Ryan, that's not... We love you." "I know you love me," Ryan interrupted, still not looking at her. "I know you both love me theoretically, but loving someone and actually being there for them are different things." Dr. Chen looked at David. "What's coming up for you right now, David?" David took a breath. His throat felt tight. "I'm realizing that my son just described exactly how I felt growing up. Except I had parents who were physically present but emotionally absent. And somehow I managed to do the same thing to him, just with better excuses." "What do you mean?" Dr. Chen asked. "My father was cold, distant, valued money and reputation over connection. My mother was fragile, more concerned with maintaining appearances than actually parenting. I swore I'd be different." David looked at Ryan. "But I wasn't. I was just absent in different ways. Present enough to pay for things. Absent enough to avoid actually knowing you." Ryan was looking at him now, surprised. "I'm sorry," David continued, and his voice was rough. "I'm sorry I made you feel invisible. I'm sorry I prioritized work over you. I'm sorry I sent checks instead of showing up. You deserved better than the father I've been." "Are you just saying that because the therapist is here?" Ryan asked, but there was hope underneath the skepticism. "I'm saying it because it's true, and because I'm trying to be different." David leaned forward. "I saw your sister last week, in Paris, for her birthday. We spent 2 whole days together, just talking, walking around, actually being present with each other. And she told me I needed to show up for you too, that it wasn't too late." "Is it too late?" Ryan asked quietly. "I hope not." They talked for 2 hours, about David's childhood, about the ways trauma gets passed down like family recipes, about Melissa's own struggles with being both mother and primary parent while David built his empire, about Ryan feeling caught between 2 households, belonging to neither, using drugs because they made him feel something other than empty. It was painful. It was necessary. It was the most honest conversation David had ever had with his son. At one point, Ryan said, "I heard you hired some intern. Emma told me. Said she's really smart, and you actually listened to her." David blinked. "Sophia?" "Yeah. Emma said you pay more attention to this random intern than you ever paid to us." There was hurt in Ryan's voice, but also confusion. "Is that true?" David felt his stomach drop. This was what Maria had warned him about. The projection. The replacement. "No," David said carefully. "Sophia is smart, and yes, I listened to her. But she's not replacing you. She's not even—" He stopped, started over. "Sophia challenged me to be better, made me realize how badly I've messed up with you and Emma. She's the reason I went to Paris, the reason I'm here now. But she's not more important than you. Nobody is more important than you." Ryan studied his father's face, searching for lies. "You really mean that?" "I really mean that." David paused. "I know I haven't shown it. I know my actions have told you the opposite for 14 years. But I'm here now. And I'm going to keep showing up. Not perfectly. I'm going to mess up. I'm probably going to disappoint you sometimes. But I'm going to try. Consistently. That's what I'm promising." "Promises are easy," Ryan said. "You're right. So watch what I do, not what I say." After the session ended, David walked with Ryan around the facility's grounds. Just the two of them, Melissa having gone to talk with the clinical director about Ryan's progress. "This place is nice," David said, because he didn't know what else to say. "It's expensive," Ryan corrected. "There's a difference." "Fair point." They walked in silence for a bit, past the meditation garden and the building where group therapy happened, and the basketball court where nobody was playing. "Dad?" Ryan said finally. "Yeah?" "Are you really going to be different? Or is this just another thing where you're intense about it for a few weeks and then forget?" David thought about Sophia's text. Small choices, repeated. Eventually, you become the person you're choosing to be. "I'm really going to try," David said. "I've started therapy. I'm working less. I'm actually showing up for people instead of just sending money and assuming that's enough. It's weird and uncomfortable and I kinda hate it, but I'm doing it anyway." "Why now? Why not 5 years ago? 10 years ago?" "Because 5 years ago I wasn't ready to see how badly I'd failed. 10 years ago I was still too busy building an empire to notice I was destroying everything that actually mattered." David stopped walking, turned to face his son. "I don't have a good answer, Ryan. I'm sorry it took this long." "I'm sorry it took you ending up here for me to wake up. That's on me." Ryan's eyes were shining. "I don't want to hate you, Dad, but I also don't know how not to." "Then don't," David said. "Hate me if you need to. Be angry. I deserve it. But also let me show you I can be better. Those two things can exist at the same time." They walked back to the main building in silence. At the entrance, Ryan stopped. "Will you come back?" he asked. "For the next family session?" "Yes. I'll be here every week until you're done with the program. And after that, I'll keep showing up. I promise." "Okay." Ryan hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged David. Brief, awkward, but real. "Okay." David held his son and felt something break open in his chest. Not pain exactly, more like the feeling of something frozen finally starting to thaw. Back in Boston, David threw himself into being present, not in the obsessive workaholic way he'd done everything for the past 20 years, but in a measured, intentional way that felt foreign and uncomfortable and necessary. He kept his promise to Ryan. Flew to California every Thursday for family therapy. Sometimes Melissa came, sometimes she didn't. But David showed up. Every time. Even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. He called Emma twice a week. Sometimes they talked for hours, sometimes just for 10 minutes. But he called. Consistently. He had dinner with Maria and Sophia once a month, always at their house in Dorchester, always with Maria's cooking, always with conversations that challenged him to think about the world differently. He watched Sophia thrive at Sullivan Ventures, watched her become not just a good analyst, but a great one. Watched Jamie and Kev and Priya treat her like a peer instead of an intern. Watched her save them from bad investments and push them toward better ones. And he was careful. Careful not to project onto her. Careful not to make her responsible for his redemption. Careful to see her as Sophia, and not as the daughter he wished he'd raised, or the son he was trying to repair, or any other narrative except her own. In August, David got a call from Rosa Martinez at Raices Legal Collective. "David, I wanted to update you on what we've been able to do with your funding." She sounded excited, energized. "We hired 2 more lawyers, both excellent, both committed to the work. We expanded our office space. We're now taking 3 times as many cases as we were 6 months ago. You've literally changed what we can do." That's what I wanted to hear. And I wanted to tell you, we're naming our new legal clinic after your mother. David's heart stopped. What? The Eleanor Sullivan Legal Clinic. I know she wasn't perfect. Maria's told me some of what happened. But Maria also said your mother was complicated. That she had moments of kindness, even if she was trapped in a system that made her complicit. We thought naming it after her might be a way to give her a different legacy. To let her name mean something better. David couldn't speak for a moment. His mother had died 5 years ago, quiet, dignified, never having apologized for anything. He'd barely mourned her because he didn't know how to mourn someone who'd never really been there. "Thank you," he managed finally. Thank you. Thank Maria." It was her idea. After he hung up, David sat in his office and cried for the first time in years. For his mother, for his father, for all the ways his family had been broken and all the ways he was trying to fix what could be fixed and accept what couldn't. Jennifer found him like that, red-eyed, trying to compose himself. "Are you okay?" she asked, actually concerned instead of judgmental. "Yeah, I think I am, for the first time in a long time." September arrived, Sophia's last week at Sullivan Ventures before starting at Morgan Stanley. On her final day, the team threw her a small party in the conference room, cake from an expensive bakery, a card everyone had signed, Jamie giving a speech about how she'd made them all better analysts just by refusing to accept bullshit. "And we're definitely hiring you away from Morgan Stanley as soon as your 2 years are up," Priya added. "So don't get too comfortable in traditional finance." Sophia laughed. "Deal. But I'm negotiating my salary this time. You got me cheap this summer." "You got fair market rate for an intern," David protested. "Exactly. Cheap." Sophia grinned. "Next time, I'm coming in with knowledge and leverage." After everyone else had filtered out, David and Sophia stood in the now empty conference room, looking at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Thank you," David said, "for this summer, for challenging me, for making me want to be better." "You did that yourself," Sophia said. "I just asked questions. You found the answers. Still, thank you." Sophia turned to face him. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "When I first met you at graduation, I thought you were just another rich white guy having a moment of guilt that would pass as soon as it became inconvenient. I was prepared to hate you on principle." "That's fair." "But you showed up. You kept showing up. Even when it was uncomfortable, even when it would have been easier to write a check and walk away. You actually tried to be different." Sophia smiled. "So thank you. For proving me wrong, for being someone worth knowing." David felt that now familiar pressure in his chest. "You're going to do amazing things, Sophia. At Morgan Stanley and beyond. The world has no idea what's coming." Damn right it doesn't. She hugged him. Quick, fierce, the kind of hug that said goodbye and see you later in equal measure. Take care of yourself, David. Keep going to therapy. Keep showing up for your kids. Keep being the person you're choosing to be. I will. Promise. After she left, David stood alone in the conference room as the sun set over Boston, painting the harbor in shades of gold and pink that looked fake but weren't. His phone buzzed. Emma. Ryan told me about your session yesterday. He said you actually cried. I'm impressed. David. I'm trying. Emma. I know, we all see it. Keep going, Dad. It's working. Another buzz. This time Ryan. Thanks for coming this week. And every week. It helps. David stared at that message for a long time. 3 words. It helps. That meant more than any business deal he'd ever closed. He drove home to his townhouse, which still felt empty but somehow less lonely. Poured himself a scotch and sat on his uncomfortable couch, thinking about the past 6 months and how much had changed. He'd gained a daughter who wasn't his daughter, lost his comfortable ignorance about his family's legacy, found relationships with his actual children that had been buried under years of absence and money. He'd learned that redemption wasn't a destination, but a direction, that you didn't become a better person through one grand gesture, but through small choices, repeated until they became who you were. His phone rang. Maria. Hi, she said when he answered. Sophia told me it was her last day. How are you doing? Surprisingly okay. Sad she's leaving, but proud of her, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Maria paused. David, I wanted to tell you something. About that first day at Harvard graduation. Yeah? When I saw you standing there looking at Sophia, I thought the worst thing that could happen was you trying to claim her, trying to insert yourself into our lives out of guilt or obligation or some misguided sense of paternal right. David waited, not sure where this was going. But you didn't do that, Maria continued. You respected our boundaries. You listened. You showed up in ways that actually helped instead of just making yourself feel better. You became someone we chose to have in our lives, not someone forcing his way in. Her voice was warm now, almost tender. That takes strength, David. Real strength. I wanted you to know I see that. Thank you, Maria. That means more than you know. You're welcome. Now go call your children. Tell them you love them. That never gets old, even when they're grown. After they hung up, David did exactly that. Called Emma, told her about Sophia's last day, listened to her talk about a gallery she was interviewing with in New York. Called Ryan, asked about his day, didn't try to fix anything, just listened. Then he opened his laptop and did something he'd been thinking about for weeks. He started writing. Not a business plan or a speech or an email, but a letter. To whomever finds this, my name is David Sullivan. I'm 42 years old. I've been married 3 times, failed twice as a father, and built a moderately successful company while neglecting basically everything else that mattered. This isn't a confession. It's a record. 6 months ago, I attended a Harvard graduation and saw a woman I'd known 20 years earlier, a woman my family had wronged in ways I'm still discovering. She was there with her daughter, who looked exactly like me, but wasn't mine. That moment, seeing them together, realizing how little I knew about the consequences of my family's actions, broke something open in me. Or maybe it just finally let me see what had been broken all along. He wrote for hours, about his father's cruelty and his mother's complicity, about Maria's strength and Sophia's brilliance, about Emma in Paris and Ryan in rehab, about learning that money couldn't buy redemption but presence might earn it, about becoming someone worth knowing, one uncomfortable choice at a time. When he finally stopped, it was past midnight. His scotch sat untouched on the table, forgotten. His townhouse felt less like a mausoleum and more like a place where someone actually lived. He saved the document, Didn't know what he'd do with it. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. And went to bed. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, David Sullivan slept deeply and without dreams, content in the knowledge that tomorrow he would wake up and continue becoming the person he was choosing to be. 2 years later, Sophia walked into Sullivan Ventures on a Monday morning in September, wearing a tailored suit that screamed, "I've spent 2 years in traditional finance and learned how to play the game," carrying a leather briefcase and the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly what you were worth. Jennifer looked up from her desk, smiled. "Welcome back. David's expecting you. Conference room." The office was different, bigger now. They'd expanded to another floor. More analysts, more investments, more success that David was trying to channel into things that actually mattered. David was in the conference room with Priya and Marcus, reviewing something on a screen. He looked up when Sophia entered, grinned. "There she is. How does it feel to be done with Morgan Stanley?" "Like I just got out of a very expensive prison where everyone wore nice suits." Sophia set down her briefcase. "I'm ready to do actual good instead of just making rich people richer." "Music to my ears." David stood, shook her hand formally, then gave up and hugged her. "Welcome home, Sophia." "Home," Sophia repeated, testing the word. "Yeah, that works." They sat down to discuss her role, junior partner, focused on impact investments, equity stake in the company. Real power, real responsibility. Priya pushed forward a contract. Standard partner agreement. Read it carefully. Negotiate anything you want changed. David insisted we give you actual leverage in these discussions. Sophia picked up the contract, started reading. After a minute, she looked up. "This is way more generous than I expected." "You earned it," David said simply. 2 years ago, you proved you were worth investing in. Now we're doing it properly." "Also," Marcus added, "if we don't lock you down with a good offer, you'll just go start your own firm and become our competition. This is self-preservation." Sophia laughed. "Smart man." They spent the next hour discussing strategy, potential investments, the companies Sophia wanted to focus on, renewable energy, affordable housing, educational technology that actually helped underprivileged students instead of just making things easier for rich kids. "I want to build something that matters," Sophia said, "not just make money. Actually change things." "Then let's change things," David agreed. After the meeting ended, David walked Sophia to her new office, a real office, with a door and a window and her name on a placard. Sophia Alvarez, partner. "How's Maria?" David asked. "Good. Busy with Raices. They're expanding again, opening a second location in Lawrence, using your model of sustained funding to actually build infrastructure instead of just surviving grant to grant." Sophia smiled. "She's proud of what you've built. Told me to tell you that, even though it'll probably make you cry." "I don't cry." "You definitely cry. I've seen it." David laughed. "Fair. How about you? How are you doing?" "Honestly, really good. Morgan Stanley taught me a lot, mostly about what I don't want to be, but it was worth it. Learned the game, made connections, proved I could play at that level." Sophia looked around her new office. "But this feels right, like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." "I'm glad you're here." "Me too." Sophia paused. "Hey, I heard Ryan's home from his program. How's he doing?" "Good days and hard days, but mostly good. He's living with Melissa, finishing high school, actually talking to me like I'm a human being instead of a stranger." David smiled. "We have dinner once a week when I'm in California. Sometimes he even initiates conversation." "That's huge." "It is." David looked out the window at the city. "Emma's coming to Boston next month. Got a job at the MFA, assistant curator position. She'll be close enough to actually see regularly." David Sullivan surrounded by his children. Who would have thought? "Not me," 6 months ago. David turned back to Sophia. Thank you for all of this, for challenging me to be better, for making me realize what actually matters. You did the work, David. I just asked questions. Still, thank you. Sophia's phone buzzed. She checked it, smiled. Mama wants to know if you're free for dinner next week. She's making pernil. Tell her yes. Always yes to her pernil. Will do. Sophia looked at him, that familiar analytical expression. You're really happy, aren't you? Like actually happy. David thought about that. About his kids who were slowly becoming people he knew. About Maria and Sophia who'd crashed into his life and refused to let him stay comfortable in his ignorance. About work that felt meaningful instead of just profitable. About therapy every Tuesday and family dinners and showing up even when it was hard. Yeah, he said. I really am. 5 years later. The Raices Legal Collective Gala was held in a hotel ballroom in downtown Boston, packed with 300 people who'd paid good money to support immigrant families and celebrate 5 years of expanded operations. David sat at a table with Maria, Sophia, Emma, and Ryan, now 19 and applying to colleges with cautious optimism. Melissa was there too, at a different table but not distant. Their relationship transformed from hostile exes into something approaching friendship. Rosa Martinez stood at the podium giving a speech about the families they'd helped, the deportations they'd prevented, the lives they'd changed with consistent funding and dedicated lawyers. 5 years ago, Rosa said, we were struggling to keep our doors open. Today we have 2 locations, 8 full-time lawyers, and we're expanding into policy advocacy at the state level. None of this would be possible without our founding partner, Sullivan Ventures, and David Sullivan's commitment to sustained support. The room applauded. David felt Emma squeeze his hand. But more than the money, Rosa continued, David gave us something else. He gave us respect. He listened to our community, learned from our experiences, and used his resources to amplify our work instead of trying to control it. That kind of partnership is rare. We're grateful for it. After the speech, people came up to thank David, to shake his hand, to tell him stories about families Raices had helped. He listened to each one, actually listened, thinking about how different this felt from the charity galas he used to attend, where wealthy people congratulated themselves for being generous. This felt real. This felt like it mattered. Later during dinner, Sophia leaned over. You know what's wild? What? That first day at graduation, if you'd told me we'd be sitting here together 5 years later, you, me, Mama, your kids, I would have thought you were insane. So would I, David admitted. But here we are. Here we are, Sophia agreed. She raised her glass. 2 unlikely families and second chances and rich white guys who actually do the work instead of just feeling guilty. I'll drink to that, Maria said, laughing. They clinked glasses. David and Maria and Sophia and Emma and Ryan, 5 people who'd been broken or wronged or neglected or lost, now bound together by something more complicated than blood, but just as strong. After the gala, David walked out into the Boston night with his children. Emma was talking about a new exhibit she was curating. Ryan was explaining his college essay about addiction and recovery with the kind of openness that still surprised David every time. They were whole people, complicated people, people he was finally getting to know. Dad, Emma said as they waited for their cars, I'm proud of you. I know I don't say it enough, but I am. Me too, Ryan added. You're not perfect, but you keep trying. That counts for something. David felt his throat tighten. Thank you. Both of you. For giving me chances I didn't deserve and for giving me more than I've earned. Well, we're not totally forgiving, Emma said, but we're working on it. Fair enough. His children left in their Uber. David stood on the sidewalk waiting for his own car, thinking about everything that had changed since that day at Harvard when he'd frozen in place, staring at a girl who looked like him, but wasn't him. He thought about his father, dead now for 7 years, his toxic legacy slowly being replaced by something better. He thought about his mother, complicated and complicit but now memorialized in a legal clinic that actually helped people instead of just maintaining appearances. He thought about Maria, strong and graceful and everything his family had tried to break but couldn't. He thought about Sophia, brilliant and fierce and exactly who she was supposed to be. No longer his redemption narrative but her own complete story. And he thought about himself, 47 now, still imperfect, still making mistakes, but finally becoming someone he could live with. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. Mama wants to know if you're coming to dinner this weekend. Also, I'm bringing my girlfriend. Fair warning, she's a labor organizer and she's going to have opinions about everything. David smiled, typed back, tell her I look forward to being challenged, and yes, to dinner. Always yes. The car arrived. David got in and headed home. Not to his empty townhouse anymore, but to a smaller apartment in Cambridge, closer to his kids, filled with actual books and photos of actual people he loved, instead of expensive, meaningless art. As the car crossed the river, Boston's lights reflecting in the dark water like stars that had fallen and decided to stay, David thought about that day at Harvard, about freezing in place when he saw Sophia and Maria, about thinking the worst, about discovering something better. He'd thought that moment was about confronting his past, about secrets and paternity and the consequences of his family's cruelty, but it had actually been about his future, about learning to see people instead of just seeing through them, about understanding that family wasn't just biology but choice, about becoming someone worth knowing through small decisions, repeated until they became who you were. The past never really dies, David thought, but it doesn't have to define you either. Sometimes the face in the mirror doesn't belong to your future, but to a future you were never part of. And sometimes, if you're lucky and brave and willing to do the uncomfortable work, you get to be part of something better, something real, something earned. David arrived home and went inside, ready for whatever came next, finally comfortable with the man he'd become and the man he was still becoming. Finally, after 47 years, he was present in his own life. And it was enough. Sometimes the people who challenge us the most end up changing us for the better. Have you ever had someone unexpectedly walk into your life and make you question everything you thought you knew about yourself? How did that change you? Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.